of Realtors. And I'll let y'all get going as soon as you're ready.
All right, my name is Deshaun Davis with the Mississippi Realtors. Thank you for having us with you here. I also have with us Gary Parker, who is our immediate past president, and Michael Anderson, who is our first vice president, and then also Gina Nolan, who is our president also. We'll just start here. All right. So current state of housing in Mississippi. Mississippi is one of the most affordable states in the country on paper. Median home prices are far below the national average, and the state's home ownership rate is one of the highest in the U.S. About 75.8% of Mississippi households own their homes in 2024. That's roughly 10 percentage points higher than the national rate, according to Fred. But the headline kind of hides two serious problems. We don't have enough quality move-in ready housing at price points first-time home buyers can actually finance. And then the costs are rising faster than wages in critical pockets, such as our coastal markets, university towns, our job growth corridors like Metro Jackson, Hattiesburg, and DeSoto County, which is already locking working families, teachers, nurses, police officers, and then young buyers out of the market. Statewide medium sale prices is still in the mid 200,000s, roughly 233,000 to 239,000 in 2024, and that's well below the national median. And there, when I wrote this, it was at about 300. That is about 400,000 as of now. And we're still lower than hot southeastern neighbors like Tennessee and Florida. But even at Mississippi's lower price point, higher interest rates, higher insurance, and higher materials and cost of constructions have erased a lot of that cheap housing advantage that we have here. So what does that kind of mean in practice? A 235,000 starter home at today's price can easily produce a 16 to 1900 total monthly payment once you put in principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and then required repairs and maintenance. So for many Mississippi households earning 50 to 60,000 a year, that is approaching or crossing that 30% of income affordability. Lower income renters remain severely cost burdened. Mississippi has tens of thousands of extremely low income renter households that's earning below the 30% of the area median income, and who cannot find units that are affordable to rent. The National Low Income Housing Coalition continues to rank Mississippi as having a housing shortage or a deeply affordable housing shortage. We're also underbuilding here in the state. Construction activity is slowing because of development costs, labor costs, utility tap fees, and then timelines have increased a lot. But wages and rents in Mississippi often do not support new build pro formas without subsidies or some creative structuring. So this is happening nationwide, not just in Mississippi, where residential construction is falling and builders are pulling back, and that's according to constructioncoverage.com. So Mississippi's challenge is no longer just is housing cheap compared to California. Mississippi's challenge is, can a Mississippi household that works in Mississippi actually buy a house with Mississippi wages? So also we're looking at our jobs near or homes near jobs. So the current state of housing in Mississippi here, if our clicker will work, and it was just working. Well, now it's not working, but we'll keep moving forward. Oh. So income versus costs. Affordability is usually defined as housing costs that's less than or equal to 30% of your gross household income. So Mississippi medium household income is still in the high 50,000 range. For example, a 58,000 has been cited alongside a medium list price of about 278,000 in the 2025 affordability discussions. And now it's moving and doing a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't tell it to do. I guess somebody else is controlling it. So what that means with that income, a 1,600 monthly payment is about 33% of gross for a 58,000 household in Mississippi. So income insurance, taxes, and repairs are rising faster than wages, especially in our storm-exposed counties and the older housing stock neighborhoods. So a lot of buyers are payment cap, even with higher looking, even with lower home prices. So renters in Mississippi also under pressure. Mississippi has about 345,000 renter households, and about 31% of all households in Mississippi are renters. Among them, your extremely low renters that make less than or equal to 30% of the area median income are the most cost burden. A very large share of renters spend about 30 to 40%, and in some are as high as 50% of their income on rent, utilities, and basic housing costs. So federal support like your housing choice vouchers, your low income tax credits, is heavily oversubscribed. Nationally, 3 out of 4 income eligible households do not receive assistance, and Mississippi kind of mirrors that shortage. This matters because renters are tomorrow's first-time home buyers. And so when renters are cost burdened, they can't save for down payments. So Mississippi's strong home ownership culture erodes over time. And so we're looking at kind of some of our supply constraints here. And so we're looking at, even though Mississippi's medium home value is about 170 to 180, depending on the data that you look at, it's still roughly half of the US median. And the supply of quality homes in that range is really tight. So we have aging housing stock, which is a lot of our affordable units. You also, if you look at affordable or your aging housing stocks, they have a lot of repair needs that are needed, such as HVAC updates, electrical updates, foundation work. And then you pair that with construction slowdowns. So builders are facing the same material and labor shortages as your high cost states. But Mississippi sales prices and appraisals do not rise enough to cover some of those increases. So as a result, you have fewer newer homes actually get built at the starter home prices. So if you look at also local zoning and permitting timelines, and infrastructure requirements can turn a feasible 50-acre lot subdivision into a unfinanceable science project. If every lot requires oversized draining, sidewalks, turn lanes, and offsite utility upgrades, and you have no public participation in those costs, then all of those things can add to our supply constraints. So if you look at kind of Mississippi Home Court, which was created to help with some of these gaps and build some cross-government partnerships around affordability, but that demand is still outpacing what current programs can deliver. So you look at some of the structural drivers of Mississippi's affordability problem: financing and interest rates. We got good news yesterday. The Fed dropped interest rates by 1/4 basis points. So overall, they've dropped them about a half of basis point, which opens up the market to a lot more buyers. But higher mortgage rates and stricter underwriting has priced thousands of Mississippi households. Nationally, $1,000 increase in medium new home prices, or even a 25% or a 1/4 bump in mortgage rates, can push tens of thousands of households out of eligibility to buy. So in a low wage state like Mississippi, even small moves in the rate or insurance premiums can wipe out a buyer pool pretty fast. So when you look at kind of insurance and resiliency costs, insurance costs such as wind and flood are a growing share of the monthly payment, especially along our Gulf Coast. They're having major issues along the Gulf Coast. Those costs don't build equity, they just drain your buying power. So the more you put in the insurance, the more you put in those things, the less house you can afford. So you also add in kind of your land use and red tape, and then you add in, so you're looking at kind of minimum lot sizes that you have in a lot of areas. You look at single family only zoning, and you look at the move away from doing duplex, triplexes, and fourplexes, small lot cottages. There's some movement on ADUs and things of that nature. So when those kind of formats are blocked, the only thing left to do is to build full suburban single family homes on larger lots, which is more expensive per unit and spreads infrastructure costs further and further away from where our jobs are located at. So if you look at kind of infrastructure and cost dumping, and I'm gonna try to find kind of get the slide caught back up with where we are. So cities and counties in Mississippi kind of routinely push the full cost of kind of water, sewer, and a lot of that infrastructure costs onto the development. And then that gets baked into every single house and every single lot that's built. So if you do that and you add 20 to 30,000 per lot, eventually that's just not sustainable. So if you look at that and add on top of that wage stagnation at a working class level, so it's price relative to income. Are we as affordable as we think that we are? So kind of what happens if we do nothing with all of these issues that we just named? We're going to end up where our teachers, our nurses, our first responders, and hospitality service workers are commuting further and further because they can't live where they work at. We're going to have workforce recruitment problems. Employees trying to bring in talent will find that decent housing near job centers is either unavailable or unacceptable or old and requires too much updating. So you have more out-of-state investors buying houses and they're buying them in bulk, and that permanently remove that housing stock out of the inventory. And then you're going to have a decline in home ownership rate among young Mississippians, even if the overall statewide rate still looks good because our older residents are aging in place. They'll keep that headline number up, but your 25 to 40-year-olds won't be able to find a house. So you're going to you're going to slow down your economic growth because housing is economic development when you really think about it. A town that can't house its workforce can't scale jobs. So if you're looking at what's happening in some of our other southern metros, that's happening with them right now. So some of the things that we can kind of do is force kind of strategic solutions to fix some of these issues. You can start with some starter home zoning. So houses that are on smaller lot sizes that you can kind of look at that will make it more affordable and bake those costs across more lot sizes. Looking at ADUs as an affordable option as far as kind of second options there, and then having duplex and triplex and fourplexes in some of your residential areas. So some of these formats could cut land costs per door. They'll spread some of that fixed infrastructure costs across more units and create naturally lower price points without requiring any kind of subsidies. Also, another solution that you may look at is kind of fast tracking workforce subdivisions. If you have X amount of lots that are at a certain target price. You can include basic sidewalks, basic drainage into those, and then have basic workforce subdivisions near existing water and sewer lines. So you have reduce tap and impact fees, then you have a public participation in some of those offsite improvement costs. So what another solution that we can also look at is kind of reusing some of our available housing stock. Cities, land banks can identify some of that aging housing that's structurally sound, but may not be financeable on the FHA or USDA. You can partner with builders across to get low interest access to rehab capital through the Mississippi Home Corp. And then finished homes are sold with deed restrictions that may restrict selling it or flipping those houses at a cost. So you can stabilize some of your older neighborhood, keep housing near jobs and school, and create owner occupants instead of absentee landlords. So what are some of the things that you can kind of do to lower the monthly payment for your buyers? Down payment and closing cost assistance, increase some state funding in some of those down payment assistance program for first generation home buyers, create an interest rate buy down where you can assist with some of these higher interest rates. We don't see interest rates going back to any threes or fours anytime soon. And interest rates is one of the biggest costs of housing unaffordable. And then insurance stabilization, that's going to be one of the things in Mississippi. There's always a conversation about insurance and what you can do to lower those insurance. Every time I talk with a realtor on the coast, insurance is one of the main things that they're talking about. And so how do we kind of keep those insurance costs down? I know there's some conversation on fortified roofs and elevation and flood vents and things of that nature. So what can we do to kind of remove some of those local cost barriers? Rationalize fees. Cities and counties can kind of look at what's actually health and safety or what things are actually over restriction and just more red tape on or adding more housing stock. Public-private infrastructure cost sharing. You can have developers where some of those on-site improvements are shared with the local municipalities and that developer. And it's not like giving that developer a handout, but if you think about it, it's investing in your tax base, investing in home ownership. if you want to protect renters while creating a path to home ownership, kind of looking at expanding your low income housing tax credit in your workforce, rental production job centers there, rental rehab to plus some code enforcement partnerships, and then looking at renter to owner pipelines. If you treat housing as kind of a core infrastructure and make it part of economic development, any new jobs that are coming in, those people have to have somewhere to stay. So if you incentivize, if you bring in these jobs, then let's make housing and economic development as part of that. In conclusion, we still have one of the most affordable states in America. We still have a home ownership rate that's 75%. Inside of that, but working families are slowly being priced out of decent, safe, and affordable housing. Just not because we suddenly, want to become California or any way place like that, but because wages, finance costs, insurance, infrastructure policies, local zoning, and some of those things have gotten out of sync with providing housing that's affordable and safe for families here in Mississippi. So if we want to kind of lead the South in some of these things, we can cut some of the red tape on development costs, share infrastructure costs, directly lower monthly payments for people who actually are working here and live here, and then reuse some of the housing infrastructure that we currently have. And then if you do that, Affordable Mississippi starts, being an accent of low wages and becomes something that's intentionally competitive for our state. Are there any questions? I know that was a lot. It's probably was like drinking from a water hose, but when you talk about housing and some of the issues that we have, and it's a lot, and I hit on a lot of different places, and you have, I think, a representative from every single category that I hit on here speaking to you today. So are there any questions that I can potentially answer for you?
Yeah, I think so. Senator McClendon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two questions. If, and I'm gonna put my alderman hat on, dust it off. If the developers do not pay for the infrastructure you're talking about, and it goes back on the cities, won't they have to raise millage? Because most of them are running on a tight budget anyway.
So, and a lot of these things that I gave you as far as kind of some ideas here, there needs to be, and there will have to be conversations between our cities, between our developers, between a lot of our stakeholders. But there are ways that as if you're developing a subdivision and you look at kind of what your average linear foot to build that those infrastructure costs are. And a lot of times some of that infrastructure cost is outside of the development. So some areas will require an offsite upgrade, such as sewer systems is one of the main ones. And they'll require that developer, hey, look, you're putting 50, 60 homes in, you're gonna have to upgrade the sewer system for everybody in there. And that cost gets baked back in. If you look at it versus kind of a subsidy for the builder and look at it, hey, look, if we have more rooftops, we have a higher tax base, then you can kind of answer some of those questions in there.
I know in South Haven, Horn Lake area, they were on the Memphis sewer system for years, and they enjoyed the lower rates more than Hernando and Olive Branch in the county. Well, Memphis gave them a date to when they would be off of that sewer system, and it has been vastly approaching us in the last 5 years. I believe we have 4 more years to complete it at a cost of $350 million. That's today. I don't know what it'll be in 4 years. So having to pay that and what we got coming, because I believe the last number I heard, we had 130 plats to be built. They are filed in the county, ready to go. Now, we do have a county sewer system, DeCrua, and everybody pays into it. But it's harder for the municipalities to have to cough up that money, especially COVID money. They all got COVID money just about. But and a lot of them use that for water tanks or their sewers. But it's tough to get a municipality to be able to do that. So I'd love to see how that's going to work out. My next question is, in the past, I would say since COVID started, we've had numerous, on top of just astronomical amounts of hedge funds and huge rental companies buying affordable housing. Not only, even numbers higher than what you've got here. You can almost put say, a young couple finds a house and they will be undercut $25,000, $35,000, $50,000 by a hedge fund that they don't care if they take a loss on it. They're just going to write it off because they're putting money somewhere. How do we deal with that?
So that's a difficult one to answer, because you can't, some of these big hedge funds, they have unlimited pockets. But there are small pockets in small areas where you have one-offs that they're just not built to do. There may be one or two houses that are on the street that may need rehab funds, that may need to be added back to the housing stock. And a lot of those big guys, they're looking to buy 50, 60, 100, 200, 1,000 homes at a time. And a lot of them now are doing build to rent. A lot of them are not focusing on as much of the rehab properties, but they're doing build to rent. So they're going to come in the neighborhood. They may build 300-400 units and they're solely there to rent out. If you focus kind of on some of that older aging housing stock and create some type of program to where those can be rehabbed and you provide incentive for first-time home buyers to purchase those properties, you have a more viable route versus trying to compete with a big hedge fund. Your pockets are just not going to be big enough to compete with them, but you can make a impact on a smaller scale in certain areas.
So should we try to make it harder for that to happen for these subdivisions that are rental property subdivisions? Because there is no policing. You can tell when one happens, you'll have 6 cars parked in the grass in front of the house instead of just, thank you, your normal 2 or 3. But that's what we're getting into now. Some of these larger home builders, and they'll have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And before they finish phase 1, they'll go get phase 2 done. So it stretches that out of how many rental homes, and there's no police in it. And the developer will not turn that over until it's 70% built out. So us as a state, I don't know if we need to look at how we're going to police that more, the rental property compared to home ownership in subdivisions, and who is going to do it? Is it going to be Secretary of State? Is it going to be local authorities? But it's got to have some teeth in it to be able to work. Thanks.
So I'll add, as a tricky question, as a realtor and as a proponent of private property rights, I don't prefer to hear any restrictions as far as what you can or can't do with private property, but because rental housing, rental apartments is very much needed. Today's renters are tomorrow's first-time home buyers. So you need good, affordable rental properties, but how do you kind of, marry that with not over building rental properties and kind of erring on the side of home ownership? That's a question that I think your local municipalities will have to look at and kind of look at what their needs are, what fits well, because what may work on the coast doesn't necessarily work in North Mississippi. What works in a college town may not necessarily work in another town. So I think those type of decisions you have to look at them on a case by case and a municipality by municipality basis. So.
And just adding to that, subdivisions obviously can have their own regulations regarding rentals, and those subdivisions, HOAs can as well. And you see that in some cities also. But it would be dangerous for the state, I believe, or municipality to dictate those amounts because it's in flux. It's not a static number of who needs to rent and who needs to own from today to 5 years from now. So I think that's something that may always be in flux, and the market is likely to always be in a little bit of a lag with that. Senator Delano?
Deshaun, thank you very much for your presentation. You did a really good job.
Thank you.
You and I have had the opportunity to talk on the phone a couple of
have.
times over these issues, and I thought you made a very good presentation today. There are a couple of things I want to clarify for really the whole group, and I'm only asking you because you're the first one that's come up. And when we talk about greenfield development, from the developer side, we look at a lot of different matrix to come up with where we're going to be at the end of the day with the type of house that's going to be built there and the price point that it's going to match. One of the very first things that we look at is the total cost of the lot. Historically, and there used to be back in the early 90s, 2000s, there was a pretty firm line with underwriting requirements for banks, and whenever we were doing developments, that I couldn't go any higher than 20% of the total house cost could be attributed to land. So when I started looking at what I was going to sell, where I wanted my price point to be, I had to back into what I could afford to pay for a lot. And I can remember, back in the day, I was able to do lots at $15,000 to $18,000 for a house, which will get me to a $185,000 house. But today, my total cost for the hard improvements required are greater than $15,000, let alone what I have to actually pay for the land or the carrying cost while I'm doing the construction. So my question is, do you see that same 20% of finished house price as being used in the market for determining kind of where the price point of the lot is? And because I think that's important as we move forward in our discussions today about how can we help with affordable housing, is we need to understand the relationship between the cost of the home versus the cost of the land and how those add to each other.
Yeah. So I believe your home builders may be able to answer that question a little bit better than I can, but your land cost and your lot cost is a big part of your end price as far as at home. And so on some of the other issues where I mentioned of sharing some of that infrastructure costs with your developers and builders may provide some price relief there, and how you do it and how you structure that in a way that makes sense for your municipalities that doesn't increase your millage rates. That's something that I think that's going to require a bunch of heads to get together and discuss on how you do that. I can easily stand up here and say, hey, look, it costs too much to develop a piece of land. And how do you get that down where, hey, look, you can't tell the underground utility company, hey, look, I want you to be 150 instead of 300,000 on your underground costs. So how do you get those down? It's going to be working as far as a public-private partnership and kind of finding some creative ways to get those costs down, because at the end, a $15,000 lot, I haven't seen that in probably they just don't exist now. We're seeing $50,000, $60,000 lots for a quarter acre lot. So, and you in some places it's 80,000, 90,000. So you can't get a $200,000 or $180,000 house when you have lots that expensive. So
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with that. And that is that if we're at $185,000 or $180,000 median home value, then if we were building that today new, that means that we couldn't pay more than somewhere around $36,000 for the lot at that 20% number. And that's before you even have the conversation about insurance. So as we move forward in this discussion, some of the things that you brought up are going to be very important. And I would just want to say thank you again for providing that context to us. And from now on, unless someone tells me differently, I'm going to still think of this as the 20% rule with respect to the cost of land.
Yeah.
And
And I-
I'm homeowner in a new home ownership
Yep.
model.
And I think your home builders, the Mortgage Bankers Association kind of looking and kind of give you some tighter numbers, but I think you would be pretty correct in that assessment of 20% of that price being in there. And that question is, how do you get that cost down? Because that's one of the key factors to making homes more affordable is your cost that you're paying for the dirt that you put in that house on.
Thank you. And on that note, that's on the front end of a development. So if you're a developer looking at that, that is a holding cost you're going to have until you get past break-even sales, not just the cost of building that you would recoup when you sell that one home. And so it plays a big factor in just the drive and the affordability to build a subdivision. Thank you. Thank you very much. You covered a lot of topics and we are grateful for the information.
And
Thank
we're
you.
always available. Reach out to Rob, the association. If y'all have any follow-up questions, we'd love to answer them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll have John Michael Rainey, President of the Mississippi Home Builders Association.
Good afternoon, everybody. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of this committee, thank you for your opportunity for me to speak today. My name is John Michael Rainey, and I am my Mississippi builder and president of the Home Builders Association of Mississippi, representing thousands of Mississippi in every corner of our state who turn raw land into neighborhoods and blueprints into homes. I want to talk about why the dream of a starter home is slipping further away for young families and what we can do about it here in Mississippi. I agree with the Mississippi Realtors Association about affordable housing, but I'm going to talk more about it, about our builder limitation and why that concept has changed over time. A starter home is the largest investment most people make in their lifetime, and for decades that meant around 1,500 square feet. Realistically, a current price per square foot around Mississippi, that's between $180 and $220 a foot, making a once modest 1,500 square foot home cost around $270,000 and $330,000. The end result is an entry-level home are far less affordable. And this takes us to our next point, attainable housing. Lot cost is the first driver in housing costs, and the second driver is minimum square footage. We recently surveyed some of our most knowledgeable builders across Mississippi for entry-level homes. And for what I'm going to go over, this is what I call sticks and bricks cost. This price per foot does not include land cost or financing and insurance cost. In DeSoto County, it's around $140 to $150 per square foot. And lot cost is around $85,000 and rising. The challenges they're facing, rural water available issues, local regulatory issues with potentially adding in-home sprinklers, which would add thousands of dollars in cost. A home in DeSoto County under $300,000 isn't attainable. Madison County, $155 per square, roughly. Lots there averaging around $65,000. The main challenge we have there are cities and municipalities have extreme limitations on square foot minimums, mostly being at the 2,000 square foot level. Rankin County is between $160 and $165 a square foot. Lots being between $68,000 and $75,000. And they have the same challenges above. Nearly all municipalities and cities are at a 2,000 square foot limit. Lee and Lamar County is between $155 and $165 per foot, and their lots range from $35,000 to $65,000. Challenges they face are shrinking lot availability, difficult for appraisals for construction and permanent financing, and a small but in-demand labor pool. Harrison County is around $155 and $165 per square foot, and lots costing around $60,000. The challenges there, they have flood zones that can add roughly $30,000 to the total cost. Wetland issues are a massive one, whether it's MDEQ or the Army Corps of Engineers. It can add months, if not years, to a project costing tens of thousands. There's a common theme here, a pattern in every county: high cost, local restrictions, and regulatory burdens. Let me start by saying this just isn't a Mississippi issue. It's a national crisis. The National Home Builders Association found government regulation accounts for 23.8% of single-family dwellings, which adds up to $94,000. Roughly 10.5 is land cost through fees, compliance, and interest carry. The remaining 13.3 arise during home construction costs, whether that's local code mandates or delays. And a family doesn't just face construction costs, they face rising monthly cost, insurance premium, and this one's twofold. Homeowners insurance has skyrocketed and builders insurance across the board has increased. General liability, workers' comp, builder risk, you name it, it's gotten more expensive. Utilities and property taxes are increasing. Permanent financing interest rates have doubled. This combination makes it nearly impossible for a young couple to build or buy a new home. And then there's the local layer. Many of the barriers are local in nature, and this is where Mississippi can lead. Minimum square footage requirements, 2,000 square foot minimums eliminate affordable housing. Minimum lot size mandates. This has risen a good bit and directly reduces development density, which in turn steeply raises the cost of lots. Infrastructure limitation, whether it's sewer capacity or availability, rural water or electrical, restricts growth in areas where people want to live. Environmental and procedural delays. This adds 6 to 12 months sometimes or more to subdivision approvals, especially when MDEQ or the Corps of Engineers is involved. This alone can push rooftops out 2 years from market. And this time adds cost, which raises the total lot cost. No builder is opposed to smart regulation, but duplicative, unpredictable, and slow process add enormous cost and pricing Mississippians out of a home. Why this matters to Mississippi. We're at an inflection point. If we do nothing, Mississippi risks becoming a state where our children will have to rent indefinitely or leave the state to own a home. But if we act, if we create a pathway for smaller, denser, lower cost homes, we can make Mississippi a national model for attainable housing. I think a few targeted steps could make a big difference. State level guidance to help local governments modernize minimums of lot size and create square foot standards, streamline permitting and land development reviews, and investment in rural infrastructure, especially in water and sewer. Pilot projects and incentive programs for first-time new home buyers using realistic thresholds. As I mentioned, this is a national problem, but Mississippi can lead with small, smart solutions by cutting red tape and revisiting outdated local ordinances and support infrastructure in the right places. We can show Mississippi is where the American dream is still affordable, and we will continue to be a great resource for this committee. I want to thank you for your time and your service to the state. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions by committee members? Senator McClendon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you found that MDEQ or Department of Health slowing down permits for building has cost added to the cost?
It does if you have the current project under financing and you're on a 6-month waiting list. It's a complicated issue. It's a good question though.
I know that we had an office up in DeSoto County and it was moved further south. And I think we've downsized the number of offices that we've had in the past 10 years.
Yes, sir.
So should that be something we need to look at to have more either outsourcing of that or more offices in the outer lying areas?
I think, MDEQ's made great strides recently. They're doing everything they can. I don't want to point fingers at anybody by any means, but it's just, this is more of a historical data fact than it is a today fact. So, I don't think anybody ever hates more staffing, but it's a complicated question.
It is when builders have to wait
It is.
3 months.
Yeah. 6
Right.
months for easily. Yeah.
Thank you. I got one more. The cities that you mentioned all have good public school systems.
Yes, sir. I would assume so.
Is that a trend why a lot of where you picked, people are moving to those areas for the affordable education?
I think it's one of many factors. I would assume people are going to where they can get the most attainable house, and you tend to see growth in areas that have good schools. I think they can be correlated, but I wouldn't say it's directly related.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Delano? Oh. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation today. One of the points that you mentioned that you thought would be helpful in reframing this process or how Mississippi can take the lead is for state level guidance. To what extent would you propose that the state could weigh in that would not, I guess, be an overreach in terms of how a developer may envision a project that he or she wants to implement?
I think you framed that question perfectly. That's obviously very delicate. It's not, I'm not here to offer the solution. I just know that that is a main driver in housing costs, is having minimum square footage. I build and develop in the Madison area, and I haven't seen a 2,000 square foot house built in a very long time. And so I don't know what it would look like for the state to get involved. And I'm not saying they should. I'm just saying it. I'm offering just an idea as a solution. Yes, Ms.
And so if the local entities have implemented restrictions, because did I understand you to say that would be the case, that there are restrictions that have been imposed
Oh, yes, ma'am.
by way of local ordinance?
Yes, ma'am.
And just having looked at the market briefly, I mean, it's obvious that, homes are significantly I won't say overpriced. I mean, that they're worth whatever the owner thinks that they are. And it also appears as though, just based on what I've seen, a lot of individuals who live out of state have retired and they can come and afford these homes. They've sold the properties where they lived.
Mhm.
What do you think the state could do in terms of reviewing the local ordinances? Do you think that that would be a viable process? I'm just, to me, it just seems like a quandary, and I don't know how to get around it.
Quandary is a good term. I don't know. It would be nice to know that data, municipality, what they perceive to be their minimum square footage. I assume they get most of their minimum square footages through economic studies and showing shortcomings of what they have in their county versus what they have a surplus in, and they try to find somewhere in the middle. I've never been given, just as a builder and developer, I've never been given a good, thorough answer of why we can't have housing at 1,500 square foot. I've just heard we don't want it. So it's just a problem we have around the state is minimum square footage, which is a limitation, in my opinion, to affordable housing.
Thank you, John Michael. You did a good job. Appreciate you coming before us today. Couple of things, just a clarification. When you say 2,000 square feet, just give me a definition of what is 2,000 square feet. That's the livable area, correct?
Correct. Heated and
And-
cooled square footage.
And a lot of times, well, maybe I should restate it this way. We've seen a shift in our culture from the way that things were in the 70s and the 80s, where now we're seeing more and more homes that are built with smaller or smaller square footage for livable area, but under roof, it's still a much, you could have a house that's 1,800 square feet of livable area, but you could also have under roof with outdoor kitchens and outdoor porches and stuff like that. You could still be 2,200 square feet under roof. And that's a shift because our society has changed and we want to do things outside more. And I think what I have seen is that we haven't updated, or maybe I should say that municipalities haven't updated some of their land development ordinances to reflect some of that. And I know that some jurisdictions have looked at it, but are you seeing that where jurisdictions are differentiating between under roof and the livable square footage?
I have not. It's always been heated and cooled. I've been building for 15 years, so I'm not seasoned as some other people out there, but it's always been referred as heated and cooled square footage. But I see what you're saying, but you know, you've got some houses that might have an 1,800 square foot plan, and then they end up putting a 3-car garage on it and a 400 square foot outdoor kitchen, enclosed type space.
Yeah, but you are,
Screened space.
but you would agree that there may need to be additional consideration for an under roof calculation used for municipal land ordinances versus just an heated and cooled square footage.
I think that is a viable possibility. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Senator Hickman.
Thank you. My questions were originally along the lines of what Senator Turner Ford asked you, but I guess my question now would be, giving those responses, what, if anything, from your presentation or what you've given us would be your biggest suggestion or the lowest hanging fruit of something that we can address regarding putting us on the forefront of solving these problems?
I think would be on the forefront of reducing housing cost collectively at a high rate would be getting development costs down. As a developer, it would blow your mind how much it costs to put in a linear foot of curb and a linear foot of road. I was involved in subdivisions 10 years ago. I wasn't a developer at the time, but the road regs and the municipality we're building in are twice as strict now. So the road beds that we have to put in are twice as expensive. And now we're having to go to a different type of pedestal for power, and we're having to have them X number of houses, and that's driving the cost up. Sewer capacity is becoming an issue, so we're having to put in more lift stations that are outrageously expensive, and all those drivers add up, not to mention it takes forever to put a development in. When you could get one done in 6 months, takes 18 months these days, and you're not going to find a landowner that's just going to just hang on a contract for a year while you try to get all that done. So now you have a year's worth of interest carry you're going to have to make up on the development cost as well, and that all gets added to the land cost, which is the first start of the home.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank y'all.
Next, we'll have John Sullivan. He's Director of State and Local Policy with Enterprise Community Partners.
Thank you, Senator Johnson, and the committee for inviting me here today. I'm John Sullivan. I work for Enterprise Community Partners. I'm State and Local Policy Director of our Gulf Coast office out of New Orleans. Enterprise is a national nonprofit. We work to make homes more affordable. We do that by providing financing to developers, working with nonprofits by providing funding and resources and knowledge, and working with housing leaders, industry leaders, and policymakers on solutions. I've been with Enterprise for 10 years, but I want to say before I joined Enterprise, I was actually worked across the street for Governor Haley Barbour and his administration on Katrina recovery. So really have been involved in the housing industry in Mississippi and addressing housing needs for about 20 years now. I wanted to touch on needs as well, at the risk of some of this has been covered, but I did have a handout that I wanted to go through just on individual housing needs. Right now we have half of our renters are paying too much in rent. We're seeing about 50% of our renters are passing that 30% cost burden percentage. That is the industry standard that we use to measure what is a cost burden, or basically, what constitutes, something that's not affordable. So that means, if you're spending more than 30% of your, monthly income in your housing costs, then that is considered, you're spending too much. So right now we're seeing about 50%. That number has grown in the past 10 years. This is really in line with what we see nationally. When you look at even renters that are even more, burdened with, say, a 50% percentage, that is, represents about 25% of renters. So we have a good many renters that are paying too much in rent. The next sheet that I have really shows the crux of the problem. That is simply that prices are outpacing incomes. This goes back to looks like the year 2000, but you could go back even further and measure increases in income and wages that have been relatively flat versus increases in housing costs, which have been pretty steep. We have seen pretty even even increases, especially after the 2008 housing crisis. But recently, after COVID, we saw that unaffordability or that housing increase gap increase widely. Third sheet I have is vacancy rates for rental. Vacancy rates are, a good indicator of supply and demand. And the balance of supply and demand right now, we have renter vacancy rates around 7.5%, which is the lowest that we've seen in about 35 years. And the other two sheets I just have on, the nature of the housing stock in Mississippi. It's no surprise that single family housing dominates the housing stock. But even if you look at rental housing stock, it's mainly single family and that small multifamily, with single family constituting about 40% of all rental housing, and then 3 to 4 unit properties less than 10 units representing another 25% or so. So that's just touching on individual needs. Look, I mean, just any way you look at it, it's been said before, where our families, our households are spending too much in housing right now. So it's a problem for, the people of Mississippi. It's a problem for communities as well. Any town needs a strong housing stock to be, a strong city, right? And having a strong housing stock is also central to having a strong tax base as well. It was said housing is economic development. Fully agree with that. Cities are having good housing and affordable housing is central to attracting workers and retaining workers, as well as attracting industry to those areas. The other need I wanted to touch on is workforce development. Housing is can be a big means of workforce development in the state. When you build housing, you're putting your local workforce to work. You have architects, electricians, plumbers, of course, construction workers, real estate agents. Everyone is getting involved and able to profit off, building homes. And we know there are a lot of developers that are interested in entering the development field, or people that want to enter the development field, but there are a lot of barriers to entry to the field. Now, at Enterprise, we just worked with the Mississippi Home Corporation on a project for developer training as their kind of developer capacity building initiative. And we created a guide that walks new developers through the development process, and we did in-person trainings and online trainings, and we got really tremendous interest from around the state. We got we did these in-person trainings around the state. We got about 75 people show up for that. We had webinar trainings online. We had similar numbers, 75, 80. People really want to get in this business, and they're entrepreneurs. that have an interest in real estate or maybe a connection to real estate already that want to build homes, but there are big barriers to entry. And the barriers to entry are really market-based. They're not, government-based. There's no real government regulation or certification for how to become a developer. It's all about, can a person, do they have the capacity, the experience, and the financial capacity for a bank to lend to them, right? Or to attract an equity investor. So what we see is developers, really have to work their way up slowly and develop experience, and then, the financial capacity that can support bigger and bigger loans. And then, retain enough money that they can, put money into their projects or support, eventually support equity investors coming in from the outside to support their development. But like I said, there's really a strong interest in this. One way that the state could really support these entrepreneurs who want to get into home building, home development, one would be with financial backing. So having some source of funding that would be that, financial backstop that a lender would look at and that could, support the balance sheet of a developer when they're trying to get a loan or when they're trying to get that equity investment. Another thing that the market really doesn't cover is pre-development loans. So this has kind of been talking about, but things like site control, all the things you have to do before you get a construction loan, all the things you have to pay for before you get a construction loan. That is, those types of loans are hard to come by. Usually that's coming out of pocket for developers. So you can see how it's really hard for a new developer to start, even start a project with all these kind of upfront costs that they have. So those are two ways you could support, the workforce development component, that financial backing, and some sort of pre-development loan financing. In terms of solutions, I agree with a lot that has been said today on the regulatory barriers. We have seen states around the country addressing regulatory barriers. We've seen states basically legalize ADUs, accessory dwelling units, statewide. We're kind of not allowing cities, towns to restrict those. There are, carrot approaches as well, where you're encouraging towns and cities to lower the regulations. Lot sizes, minimum square footage. I think, what John Michael was talking about, 2,000 square feet minimum square footage, that is not feasible. I would question whether there's any city, town in the state that a majority of the housing is bigger than 2,000 square feet. I really would. So they're putting restrictions that are fairly new. I mean, decades old, but when you look at the life cycle of the housing stock, fairly new, that they're requiring bigger and kind of more spaced out homes. Again, there's carrot approaches, there's sticks approaches that states are putting through that. We'll be happy to talk more to the committee about that. And in terms of other solutions, look, there's a full toolbox. I'm not going to go into specifics because there's too much. It just depends on, the direction the committee wants to go. Look forward to working with the committee on those solutions. But look, there's a full toolbox that's been employed nationally: homeowner, rental, developer side, construction side, the buyer side. We know how to address this problem. We really do. And states are really starting to take it on more and more. But the state legislature can absolutely get something done here. So thanks again for having me. Be happy to take.
Any questions by committee members? And you made a distinction, and it was also touched on earlier, but there's multiple different cost drivers that are affecting development of new homes. But then, as you mentioned, there's also multiple cost drivers that are affecting the cost of ownership, which if the cost of ownership is higher, that also means the cost of rent would be higher. And so I think those have outpaced wage increases, which makes the percentage of your income go more towards housing cost. But the higher rent cost is an effect of the higher cost of ownership.
I think that's right. And, you know, if I didn't have the data on rents, I just had the data on home prices. But if you saw a chart for rents, it would look the same.
Yep.
You know, some of the points that have been made earlier, I would just echo the point on insurance. That is recently a big driver of operating costs. We've seen that with a lot of affordable housing properties and the difficulty in you know, covering those operating costs with the limited rents they can get. But yeah, we've just seen housing costs really decouple from what, you know, wages are doing, and that's causing a lot of problems.
Yes, but even, and then you also show as well that even with the higher cost of renting, the available properties for rent has decreased. So even with those higher costs, people are still renting those homes.
That's right. I mean,
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we have from representing the Mississippi Bankers, Matt Mayo, who is Chief Banking Officer for Community Bank. Also, unfortunately for him, a very close friend of mine. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Just as a sense of introduction, I've been a banker about 28 years, and I have touched every one of the things that have been talked about today, whether that's financing developments or investors or mortgages. I've been fortunate to be a part in all of that. And so what I'm going to share is largely along those, touches a lot of the same things that have been said, so I won't dwell on them. But if you have a question along the way, I'll be happy to take questions at the end. But if, as we're going, you want to ask a question, I'll be happy to delve into it. I will also tell you, this is my experience and my research. It's not necessarily Community Bank's opinion on all of it. Didn't really ask anybody to come do it. I got some research for some folks, but that was about it. What I understood from the assignment really was to talk about attainable housing. And that really involves whether that's a rental house or home ownership, and then specifically talk a little bit about first-time home buyers. When you look at affordable rental housing, you know, we've been involved with it a long time. We pulled some information. There is a lot of information available. There's an organization that does state-specific work. It is called, and I relied on it for some of this information. It is the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And many of the stats and data that have been already shared are very consistent. This group happens to look at extremely low income earners, which are those that are making less than 30% of the median wage. And based on the data, we have 59 available rental homes today per every 100 person who meets this qualification. So there certainly is an unmet need. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about their research was that they went through and looked at a fair market rent figure based on a 2-bedroom home. And this is based on some HUD data. And I don't know the underlying data, how they got here. But basically, they've determined $1,042 a month was a fair market rate. And that is using 30% of your income for housing expenses. We've heard that ratio several times. That equates to a wage of $20.03 an hour for a household. And then it goes through the details for you. And I recommend, this is an interesting 2-page document, but it goes through and looks at our most expensive areas in the state. Senator McClendon's area, the Memphis Metro, DeSoto County area, was the highest at $24.96 required for a wage. The Gulf Coast was $22.13. Metro Jackson, $20.29. And then the same side of this piece of paper, they also tell me what the median hourly wages are for common occupations in these areas. Fast food workers, $10.64. Home health and personal care, $11.24. Janitorial custodial workers, $12.64. I mean, clearly there is a disconnect from the cost of housing compared to what's being earned in many of the places for many of the folks that are renting these houses. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about wages, but well, that's only other thing I'll say about the affordable rental housing. And this comes both personal experience. I moved to the Metro Jackson area in 2022, and I moved in advance of my family, and I wanted to rent somewhere before I sold my house and moved. And then I'll speak to Metro Jackson, but I'm sure this is true for the state. The number of available units is limited. The quality of those units are limited. And shockingly, the national presence or the national investor of those rental units was surprising. You know, we lend a lot of money to local people who rent houses out. They buy those as investment property, and they live in those neighborhoods and they go to church with those people. And so I think there's a little bit of sense of pride and a little bit sense of they're part of the community and what's good for the community. But when you deal with a national firm, that's not there. And if you look at reviews or personal experience with them, it's not a great experience for the local renter to deal with a national firm or somebody that doesn't buy local. And that's a challenge, and it's a shift that you haven't seen a lot of until recent years. But now, when you look at cost of real estate and investment real estate in Mississippi, and you compare that to Texas or to California or the Northeast, these are really cheap deals for these investors relative. And these deals actually cash flow usually, which it's amazing to me when we have California investors who've come and looked at properties, they can't believe they can buy a property that will pay for itself. And so there has been an influx, and really it's probably all across the South because that's a true statement for many states. They're buying them and tickled, but they're not best for most of the renters in our state. That's just really, I based a lot on personal experience, but it is an issue. We'll really spend the most time on affordable home ownership, and really across these sort of areas, many of which have been discussed, so I won't dwell too long on them. I will touch some that there's not been much conversation on. Wages, again, I think everybody's mentioned it, and it is a problem when you look at what the average Mississippian is making, whether that's an average or a median. I pulled the data. And when I look at average wages for the state of Mississippi, and then I look at the other 49 states, we're the only one that starts with a 4. You know, we're often compared with our neighboring states, and where you see an average wage in Mississippi, $47,569. In Alabama, it's $53,394. Arkansas, $51,251. Florida, $60,216. Louisiana, $54,000. Tennessee, sorry, $56,000. And then when you look at, generally people think of what's the poorest state in the country. West Virginia is at $52,200 for an average wage, and the median wages follow suit. But it is clear that we have an earning challenge in Mississippi, and that is affecting a lot of what people can do. I will tell you that the economic development efforts across the state, I think, are worthwhile and positive, and hopefully the majority of that housing need is being met because they're hiring local people. And the reality is when they're bringing people in, they're normally not buying the type houses we're talking about. But I do think economic development is an important part of how we increase wages. I think I'm proud that the state's invested across the state where we found opportunities. And MDA has done a good job. Local economic development people have done a great job. And I think that's one of those initiatives that needs to continue so that we can continue to invest in the wages of our residents. Inflation was discussed, and it's been all over the news. And certainly when a dollar doesn't buy as much today as it did yesterday, that's a challenge, because I was talking to a guy, and I'll talk to him about a little more in a minute, this morning. He said, man, everything's going up except my paycheck. And so certainly it has outpaced the rate of particularly our lowest earners' wages. The last thing, we talked about this last bullet point. Most of these people that want to buy a home, most of these things require a down payment. They require reserves. People that are financially responsible also know there's ongoing costs of owning a home. But when you're struggling to buy groceries this week, it's hard to set money aside. And we're fortunate there's some programs that have statewide that help this, but it is a challenge that many Mississippians face. This is one that really hadn't been touched on, and I won't belabor it because I'm going to show you an illustration of it later. But when you look at the existing debt of a young worker in Mississippi, somebody who has recently gone in the workforce the last 1 to 3 years, and this comes from a number of different sources, college-related, Experian. Student loan debt is a national crisis in large part, and Mississippi is no different. 58% of all Mississippians have student loan debt when they leave an education program, whether that's at the junior college level or the four-year institution. And you got to figure that 58%, there's a certain population at the top of that group that's not borrowing anything. And so that's really a burden that's heavier on the bottom side of that equation. Card debt. Well, credit cards first. Again, credit card debt, consumer debt, it's typically entree into how people get to establish credit. And when people are struggling and it's to buy groceries or not to buy groceries, you turn to a credit card, and we have a population nationwide who has accumulated some credit card debt. Then you look at things like automobile expense. This was data that was from Experian and is at the end of last year. But public transportation statewide is pretty limited. And so for those workers to go earn a wage, even if that wage is $12 or $13 an hour, they've got to have reliable transportation. And that's a cost. And again, they don't have the money to buy those things. The average car loan balance, again, almost $26,000 at the end of last year. All those are impediments. This is one too that it covers a lot of stuff under my broad topic of financial education. And the other thing I'll say about this, even before I delve into it, is that I was putting this together, looked at research and looked at my experience. But this morning, in my office, there was a crew who was there washing windows. And when we really got to this information around unbanked folks, it was a Hispanic gentleman in my office at the time and a lady. And certainly it was a language barrier, but I was trying to ask him, hey, I'm working on some stuff around housing and home ownership. And do you own a house? And he's very skeptical, and his English was really well until I started asking information, then it deteriorated. And he said something to the lady and she walked out, and I didn't really think about it. I was trying to explain and, sort of back and forth, and supervisor came in, and is a black guy. I didn't get his name, but we talked for about 15 minutes, and I asked him same question. And I got to talk about this in a couple hours. And I realized I'm putting this together from a very different demographic from people I'm about to talk about and on behalf of. I'm a middle-aged white professional, and I have some folks that I wanted to see what their thoughts on it were. And so this gentleman was a black guy, 34 years old. And I asked him, do you own a house? He said, no, man, I don't even think that's possible anymore. One day I'd like to, but I don't know that I'll ever get there. I'm not married, but one day I'd like to get married and have a wife and kids. I love to own a house, but from what I make, and, so I made the comments about $20 an hour to be able to rent, probably more than that to own a house. And I've been here for X number of years, and I'm the supervisor, and I almost make $18 an hour. And he's the one that made the comment about every time he goes to buy something, the price is going up, but his paycheck hadn't. So, do you still want to own a house? I don't think it's attainable. I don't think my peer group, my friends, everybody I know, I got one friend who owns a house. He's married, his wife has a good job, but of all the people that I associate with, he's the only one that owns a house. And so, that is reality. That's not just my thoughts. That's not what the research, that's what talking to the gentleman this morning in my office said about it. And again, I've looked at a bunch of research, and it's from the CFPB, and I may be the only banker that ever quotes anything from the CFPB. But I thought it was interesting. They did a study And it really was dealing with, the name of the study was Banking and Credit Access in the Southern Regions of the U.S., and it was done back in 2023. One of the interesting things is unbanked people, if you're not banked, it's hard to ever buy a house. And so if you start with that problem and you look at Mississippi, Mississippi leads the nation in unbanked households, 11.1% of Mississippians. The next closest state is Louisiana at 8.1%. Sadly, we've made a lot of progress because where we came from, it was substantially worse. The average across the Southeast is 5.6 and nationwide 4.5% of people are unbanked. When you look in Mississippi, the unbanked rate for Black households is 6.6 times that of white households. There's clearly a disparity there. And what's interesting is that because of obligations placed on banks and banks alone, not other lenders, a low to moderate income person of any race, but especially a minority, is one of the most prized consumers that a bank can try to attract because of our Community Reinvestment Act obligations. You know, one of the biggest report cards I have to fill out every year that dictates, can I continue to expand my bank or can I open a new office, really ties back to how well you meet the needs of the markets you're in. And really it's targeted those folks that are in these categories, and there's still this much disparity. And I have a department and person that does nothing but work on these efforts. And we still struggle to get people in the bank to apply for loans that can qualify for loans. And a lot of that is from cultural issues that make up a lot of this, and I'll touch on them. But when we get them there, you look at other issues that they don't have credit. You know, it's people, unless you grew up, well, your dad's a banker. You know, I've had my girls on car loans since the day they got them because I paid them because I knew they needed a credit score, because credit scores directly affect interest rates, ability to qualify. It also directly affects the rates of insurance that a lot of people don't realize. And you see that a lot in older populations. They'll still have a mortgage and be escrowed, and you'll get a call frantically from, 70-plus-year-old lady that, hey, my insurance just went up 30 or 40%. She hadn't had credit in years, hadn't had new credit, maybe only ever mortgage, or some of them have their mortgage paid off, and you're the banker and they just call and say, hey, who can I get insurance from? Mine's gone up. Their credit file fell off and they don't have a credit score. And that's a major component of how insurance is underwritten. When they do have credit, the performance around that credit is often not great. Mississippi leads the nation in some things. Very few of them are good. One of them is mortgage delinquency rate. The rate of mortgage delinquency right now is 5.7% of Mississippi mortgages are 30 or more days past due. The national average is 2.8%. And we actually have a lower unemployment rate, a lower home value, and also unfortunately lower income. But all those things, when you have a credit problem, it's hard to overcome. It takes a long time to work through those issues, and they affect your availability. The other thing about the first-time home buyer, mortgages are complicated. I'm not a mortgage banker. That's one of the few things I hadn't done, but I've touched every piece of it and made mortgage loans to people. But even looking at this and looking at the programs that are available to borrowers, it's complicated. And that's from a banker who's done it for almost 30 years. I can't imagine somebody who is not overly familiar with the process, who's not really sure what to expect, who really hadn't had a lot of guidance or education around what this might look like. It's overwhelming. Just the options are unbelievable for what's out there. And there is value, certainly, in an experienced mortgage person who understands where they can fit somebody in, because the programs and the requirements are tremendous. And then you do have cultural issues that we face in Mississippi, and they're a reality. Banks are still considered, when you go and survey many of the unbanked populations, factors that came up when people talked about that they were not very or not at all interested in opening a bank account or having a bank relationship. The leading reasons and big numbers, don't trust banks, almost 40%. They're worried about their privacy, 38%. They don't have a bank location that's convenient, 17%. They don't have the ID required to be able to open the account and satisfy our know your customer requirements. Or they have problems with banking or credit history and don't feel like they'll qualify. And so that's not worth the effort. Those are real problems. And we continue to battle those. And again, the outreach effort around this for banks is tremendous. We've talked a lot about cost of ownership. And again, I'm going to illustrate this in a little while, but Mississippi is the 8th most expensive state in the nation for homeowners insurance. And when you get to the lower 5, it's even worse. And meaningfully worse when you look at some numbers in a minute. We are middle of the pack in property taxes. We're not overly burdened. But again, there are states that have delivered services at a cheaper rate. And then you have the expense of owning a house that just deals with maintaining it and utilities. And a lot of these houses these folks get to buy or try to buy starter homes, they require remodeling and more likely to have significant repairs. And there's not a good way to finance those things. There's not a good way to provide that. A traditional mortgage isn't going to give you money to be able to borrow extra to do work. You'll have to go to a bank and get almost a bridge facility where it will let you do construction and things like that. And so those are real and they have impact. This is one that it covers a lot of different things, and I'll touch on a couple of them. The collateral on the home that people want to buy. You know, when you look at certain neighborhoods and condition of properties, many programs have requirements that must be met. And I'll tell you, while I believe it's a great program and I'm glad we have it, and it's to protect the consumer. So I'm not being negative anyway, but a VA loan, the quality of a house construction and condition for a VA loan kills a tremendous number of houses because people who are selling just aren't willing to fix some of those things. And those older houses, whether it's a wiring issue or a plumbing issue, they aren't cheap. And so there are barriers like that we simply can't put a mortgage on a house that's going to be sold in the secondary mortgage market because of the condition of that property. You also have appraisal issues. You've had a rapid rise in sales in the state, and the appraisals are based on sales that have already happened. And so in areas where houses don't turn over often or may not turn over in the public domain where those records are housed in MLS type systems, it's hard sometimes to get houses to appraise, even if there's a willing buyer and a willing seller. If they can't support it with an appraisal, then they're not going to be able to qualify for the amount of money they need to purchase that house. You also have the number of appraisers nationwide is declining. The process to become an appraiser is almost an apprenticeship type program. You work real cheap for a little while, for a number of years really, before you can do them. And so you have fewer options. And then, you know, there's been in the last couple of years some concern about appraisal bias. And I mean, there's a pretty well discussed case of a same house appraised by the similar appraisers. I think you're saying we're in the same firm even. And one of them had pictures of a minority family on the wall. And one of them had pictures of a white family on the wall. And everything in the report was very similar, but in the end, you ended up with a house that appraised for less for that family that the pictures from the minority family were on the wall. I don't know that I've seen that, and I don't know that that's as prevalent as the news media would have you believe, but I don't discount that there is probably an issue out there in some cases and in some areas. In many of our poorer communities, lower income communities, title issues are a real issue. Property, because people haven't necessarily done business with banks and they've done things between friends and families. They bought a house but didn't get a deed. Deed didn't get recorded. The person that gave it to you wasn't the right person. It's surprising how often this comes up, and particularly the rural and poor communities see more of this. We partnered with a group last year. We have a grant in North Mississippi. We are working in several areas. When a house has an identified title issue, That grant pays for the attorneys to go basically try to quiet the title, clean it up. That process can take years, and that doesn't help a home buyer today. But those are issues that are a little bit under the radar that really aren't evident and people hear about very often. And then location. I mean, you want to buy a house. Senator McClendon, I think, mentioned schools earlier. There's no doubt that the quality of public education directly correlates to the value of our communities. And as education falls, home prices fall. There's no question that's real. And it also, you have safety issues. You have transportation issues. If you live in a more rural environment and don't have reliable transportation, it's hard to go to work. You got to live in town. Things like that. I mean, so those are issues that come into play. The other thing I'll talk about, and again, when I get down to part of this is where I'm definitely giving a disclaimer. This is not Community Bank stance. This is Matt's opinion. But on some of these issues, rural markets have fewer banks. It's expensive to operate a brick and mortar bank in a traditional sense. Many of these markets are served by online or non-depository institutions or credit unions, folks like that. And when you look at a complex mortgage and you're intimidated and you want to go talk to somebody, that's harder to do. The other thing that branching has affected branching is, in the 60s, the Community Reinvestment Act was passed. The Community Reinvestment Act I mentioned earlier was about making sure banks, the only ones that have the obligation, not non-depository mortgage lenders or credit unions, banks serve the area where they have a physical presence. Well, a very specific example is in the last couple of years, to define your lending area, you define an assessment area. It's historically been done by census tracts, which are subdivisions inside a county. And we have an office in Indianola and Sunflower County. Leland, in the very eastern part of Washington County, is a market that we have a banker from who's well known, and we do a lot of farming, lending, agricultural lending, and we dealt with a fair number of people in that most eastern census tract in Washington County. It's 18 minutes from my office, from downtown Leland to our office in Indianola. There are also only 5 banks in Leland. The government came out, the regulators came out in the last 2 or 3 years that says if you're going to have an assessment area defined, you have to define the entire county. You cannot divide a county. So you look at one census tract in Leland that we were able to serve adequately, but then you look at the rest of Washington County, which is 10 to 15 minutes further west, is Greenwood. Greenwood has 18 to 20 banks. It's saturated for the size market it is and for what's going on. And I have to be able to serve the needs of Greenwood, and I have to be able to compete with 18 to 20 other physical banks, not to mention online and other lenders. We either had to make a decision to not count that census tract as our assessment area, or take it all in and figure out how we're going to serve Greenwood, because if we don't, that's that report card I mentioned earlier, and then we were criticized heavily for that. We ultimately had to take Washington County out of our assessment area because we could not adequately support Greenwood without opening, and it didn't make sense to go add another bank. So while we still loan money in those areas, I have limited to how much I can loan there. I'm measured for how much I lend inside my assessment area and how much I lend outside of it. And we had to change that assessment area and the credit we got for that because of a restriction that I really don't know that that was ever what it was intended to do. And it's also doesn't make sense with what's happening today. A couple other things, and I'll run through these. A lot of the programs that are out there are really good. They have income limits, and that serves as a group of people just over those limits that's not available. A lot of those programs, and again, Mississippi Home Corps is a great example. So is the Federal Home Loan Bank. They run out of program. They run out of money. Monies are highly subscribed, and very quickly they're out, and it's a year cycle. Usually you get more. And then the other one, and I'll mention a regulation standpoint, is fair lending requirements. The intent behind them, I understand, makes sense that all people be treated equally. But what that meant is there's less lending happening today than there is more lending. There used to be that person that you got to know and had a relationship with and you could take a chance on, or you knew the family, or you knew the land was situated part of a family area and they weren't going to let it go bad. And so you could reach down and take a chance. you really have eliminated that in banking because of the emphasis on fair lending rules. While well-intentioned, the reality is I would argue that's led to less lending, not more lending. Because now with equal treatment for everybody, period, you have a standard and there's not a whole lot of ways to take a chance on somebody. And then it's been mentioned supply over and over, and so I won't belittle it, but I went and pulled data on all of the markets that I'm gonna show you in a minute. The number of houses that are available are very, very, very limited. The price points are very limited. And so part of the problem is certainly supply costs. Senator Delano asked about we still, as making development loans, look at what's the percentage of the land that makes up percentage of the house. That 2025 is still pretty common. There are markets where it's more because real estate's more, and if the market is substantially different, then we accommodate that market. But that's been discussed, and I agree with all that's been said. First-time home buyers, I mentioned these, all touched on previously. And just to wrap up, I want to give you a couple of examples. And what I did was I used Mississippi facts, and I picked counties that I think probably are relevant to you all. I also picked our lowest county and our highest county and Hinds County, and I ranked them, and it's based on, again, this is a little bit of crossing of things I care about, but I looked at teacher salaries. The average teacher salary is who I use as my home buyer and a program that teacher can qualify for that are available in the state and their rate. And you can see on this chart, as you look at each county, the average price of available house that generally are up to $200,000, what that price is, what it looks like from a principal and interest standpoint. And then you start adding on the other things like insurance and property taxes. And then many of these programs have PMI. And before you ever got to start on that, you had to look at the debt they already have. And so this is just an example, county by county, of the select group we picked, of what that looks like for a single teacher. And this isn't a new teacher. This is all teachers in a classroom, certified teachers in a classroom, average pay in 2024 from MDE. And that's what they're faced with in a payment standpoint, assuming they've done everything right to the point they get to explore this option. The next example, just for your record, is I'm married, and I picked that same teacher and I married him to a median income person in each of the individual counties. The house cost the same. I didn't even give them twice as much debt. I assumed they had twice as much student loan debt and a little more card debt, but I hope that they budgeted and that their credit card, I kept the same, factored all that in. And then you see what that looks like. And again, what stands out in these, particularly one of them that's not mortgage bank function, deals with insurance rates. And you can see what the rate is. I think it's the bottom two, the second from the bottom line show you Coastal County and what the cost is for insurance. And that doesn't even count flood insurance. That's just property and wind where it's required. And the last thing I'll leave you with is really the effects of interest rates are pretty substantial. And I'm not sure people always understand, but on the left side of this, if for a $150,000 loan and a 30-year mortgage, this shows you what just the base payment is before the property taxes and insurance, all that, what it looks like in a rate scenario at 8%, 6%, and 4%. And then on the other side, I did it backwards. If I want to have a $1,000 payment, how much house can I buy? And so then you look at what that difference is from 8, 6, and 4%. And it's $90,000. I think I can't see it from here. I think it's almost a $90,000 difference from what you can buy when rates are 8% compared to what they are at 4%. And so these are real things that impact and drive what that looks like for a home buyer. That's all that I had, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions by committee members? Senator McClendon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you mentioned the national rental companies, and I hate to keep harking on this, could they also be international rental companies?
They could be. I honestly don't know. I know I didn't call on somebody local to deal with them. So true point of origin, I don't know, but I know they're not Mississippians and I know they're not in my community.
You said California.
Yeah, well, we do have some investors I know that have showed up in California that bank has looked at doing loans for.
Now, we had bills that we passed restricting ownership of farmland in Mississippi by a hostile country.
Yes.
Should we do something like that with rental property?
Again,
And why wouldn't we?
Yeah, I don't have any personal knowledge of international entities being the force behind that, more so than I think it was mentioned earlier. Hedge funds are a fairly big player in this and folks like that who are deploying money. But I don't have a really good point of reference. I will tell you, national home builders have some of the same challenges as national rental company and property managers, and that they're not in the community. They're here to get it built and get gone. They don't go to church with these folks and see them in the neighborhood. And that is a challenge, but because of their scale, they can deliver cheaper houses. But cheaper houses means price point, but oftentimes quality as well.
Are the national companies lower on rental fees?
No,
Are they higher?
typically higher and typically less responsive when there's an issue are the most common complaints.
Thank you. I've got the numbers for DeSoto of what each city has for dwellings and how many of those are rentals, as well as the county. And I'll present this to the committee at the end when we get through. And it's going to be staggering when y'all see this. But thank you very much.
Sure, I'll tell you too, I didn't touch on it, but in the 10 counties I looked at new houses under $200,000, only 3 of them had new construction. So everything else, somebody's having to buy an existing house and deal with some issues that's typically associated with older homes.
Senator Brumfield?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your remarkable job in presenting this information about the programs. Number one, how do we make this readily available for all communities? The other question about the biases that we find in appraisals, things of that nature. I fell victim to that. My neighbor and I were very good neighbors, and he was preparing to move to Louisiana, and his appraisal, his home appraised for over 200,000. And my house is the first house there, larger house, everything, but got found out I was Black, and he gave me an appraisal for like 160,000. Same neighborhood, more land, more amenities on mine. So how do we bring our appraisals together and help them understand the need to ensure that if we're going to make housing affordable and available, how do we do the training, or do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, your first question about the programs and the successful programs, and again, Mississippi Home Corps does a great job, but it's funding. I mean, those programs are subscribed pretty quickly. Federal Home Loan Bank has a $20,000 grant for homeowners down payment assistance, but it is subscribed completely within 24 hours. They even try to space it out, and they do it quarterly now instead of the whole year's allotment up front to try to get it spaced out through the year. And so, I mean, while those programs are successful, they're expensive and they come at the cost of taxpayers. But they are, I do think home ownership is better for everybody and the communities that we live in. For the bias, I don't have a good answer. I count my blessings, I guess, that I don't know that I've seen that or that we've really dealt with it. There are some things that were put in place by regulators around how appraisals are reviewed and some of those type things. But the reality is, I think you're less likely to see it in a neighborhood that has a white homeowner and a Black homeowner on the same street than you are to see it in homeowners that are predominantly minority or predominantly white. I think it's more likely, and they're harder, and that's a little bit harder because you're not seeing things that are on the same street and get to compare them. Those communities may be further apart and they may be able to get enough sales. And some of that, there may be some reality. There may be neighborhoods and areas that are less valuable from a sales standpoint, a willing buyer and a willing seller. But I mean, it's not something that can be ignored. And I don't know how to address it, but I recognize that there is a potential that needs to be addressed, and that's not going to get better with fewer appraisers either.
Senator Leno?
Matt, thank you for your presentation. It was a great presentation. Give me your definition for a first-time home buyer. What does that person look like?
My definition is somebody that's never owned a home before. The definition for most of these programs is not owned a home or not owned a home in 3 years.
3 years, yeah. So we've seen a shift going back from what, and then you touched on this, and I think it was touched on earlier, where when interest rates were extremely low, there were a lot of incentives, a lot of federal pressures put on first-time home buyer programs, got people into difficult financial situations with the types of loans that were offered back then. Now you've seen a shift back to a higher number of people that are looking for rental properties, or they're choosing rentals to rent versus to owning. A lot of that has to do with the transient nature of our economy, especially post-COVID, where you have a lot of people that are moving around more so. That's been we have been a benefactor of that condition in South Mississippi. We've had a lot of people that have moved into the area, and you ask them why they moved into South Mississippi, and they'll tell you, you'll hear often, I should say, that they were able to now work from home, and they found the place that they wanted to live in, and they looked for cost of living, and they moved to the coast because compared to where they were coming from, we were much lower. But as you pointed out, your buying power in South Mississippi is much lower than the rest of the state. So it's still a benefactor for this, but for the first-time home buyer programs, and kind of getting back to that, you touched on programs that you provide through your community bank. There are some other things that we've used, and quite frankly, I haven't used them in a number of years, but it would be like new market tax credit programs and some quickie, low-cost loans for these types of developments. What has happened in that market over the number of years? And then what can the state do? Because we're always asked to help with tax credit things. What can we do to give community banks and our local banks more flexibility in providing good, solid, underwritten loans to hardworking Mississippians?
The things that I know are out there that we see and are asked about deal with low-income tax credits, but they deal with multifamily. And as we have explored those things as a bank, they're extremely complex. And it's just not the banking that we've grown up with. We are still, just like the name says, a community bank. We do a lot of plain vanilla lending things. We have banks, bigger and smaller, who participate in those. It's not been something that we were comfortable with, quite honestly, because of the complexity. We just don't have the expertise in it. We've explored it a number of times. So I don't have a great answer for that. And again, I don't know exactly I know there's a state credit for first-time home buyers and low-income home buyers to give you state income tax credit, things like that. They're good, but they're a piece of the puzzle. They still have to overcome some of the obstacles before you ever get there. You still have to have a credit file. You still have to find something you can afford. I don't know that there's any credit or anything quite like that you can do that the state can help solve those things other than better education. I would love to see financial education taught in the high schools because we have a group of people that when they come out, it's a learning curve, and it's one that is can have some pretty dire consequences if you don't learn quick.
Thank you. On that note, there's a federal low-income tax credit for building low-income housing. Some states have something similar or matched to that. We do not. And on new markets, they're limited to no residential unless it's mixed use.
Yeah. So, and Mr. Chairman, it's not really a question, but just a discussion here that I'd like Matt for you to fill in on. Are you familiar with Renaissance, or excuse me?
I think it is called Renaissance Fund.
Down on the coast?
Yeah, like a complex.
It's Renaissance Bank. I mean, it's not Renaissance Bank
But yes, I know.
SEC shorts. We're talking about
I'm familiar.
the group that came from the coast that established this. They use new market tax credit programs to somehow get to home buyers. And they have local banks who participate in loan pools that they manage, where they provide the financial literacy piece. They give the homeowner the education that they need to be to perform as a homeowner in their financial capacities. They also give them some additional guidance, and their failure rate is extremely low. And I think that's something that I've heard community banks say, that we like those kind of programs where we're partnering with it because there is more management of the loan itself, direct management of the loan itself, and also that there's some tax incentives for banks to do that. I would love for us to have another offline discussion about what are the taxes that you're seeing a reduction or a credit towards. If they are state taxes, is there anything that we can do to incentivize additional cooperation with these type of community lenders that are providing first-time home buyers opportunities to purchase homes, that also provides that financial literacy piece to help them be successful homeowners?
And again, we participate in revolving loan funds of different varieties through the years. Some of them have restrictions that are concerning at times, but I mean, generally, we're supportive of that, share the risk, it's good for the community. Not something we're opposed, certainly looking at. One interesting thing though, tax credits deal with income tax. And as you see a further decline in income tax in the state, those programs carry less weight, or there's less funding associated with some of those things. So there may have to be a tactic that addresses what it is that offsets.
Thank you very much, Matt. Give me just a minute. We'll come back to it. Next up, we have Scott Spivey with Mississippi Home Corp. And he probably can shed some light on tax credits.
See if that's gonna work.
All right, we'll figure that part out later. I think you guys have the handouts, right? That I have? Okay. All right, thank you all for having me. I'm Scott Spivey. I'm the Executive Director of the Mississippi Home Corporation. I've been with the agency since 1998. I've been Executive Director since late 2014. I feel like everybody's mentioned this that's been up here, so let's talk about us. We are the state's housing finance agency. We were created by the legislature in 1990 based on a study that the state commissioned called A Decent Home for Every Mississippian. Our mission is to enhance Mississippi's long-term economic viability by financing safe, decent, and affordable housing and helping working families build wealth. You can see in the second slide kind of the heat map of our, well, third one if you're scrolling. There you go. There's the heat map of loans that we've done since January 2023. We issue tax-exempt mortgage revenue bonds to finance most of our single-family homeownership programs. We've added a taxable component to that to kind of find that missing middle. The restrictions on those programs, generally speaking, are 120% area median income, 30-year fixed rate mortgages, first-time home buyers. They come with varying degrees of down payment assistance, anywhere from $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 right now. Those are structured differently, whether they're paid on sale or the $10,000 down payment assistance is a 2% 15-year amortizing loan that comes in the form of a second payment. You can see these are the counties where we do the most business.
Hines, Rankin, DeSoto, Harrison, Jackson, Madison, Lauderdale, Forest, Lamar, and Warren. Since January 2023, though, we've had at least one loan in 80 of Mississippi's 82 counties. So you can see we're working statewide. We work through our lender partnerships that are very valuable to us. Our mortgage volume right now varies anywhere between $5 and $10 million a week based on seasonality. In the peak home buying season, we were up at 10 and 11. Now we're back around 6 or 7. So first-time home buyers, my point is, are buying homes in Mississippi. Can we go to the next one, please? Yep. Now, here's what that looks like. Since 2023, you're looking at over 4,500 homes purchased. Our average home price is much lower than the median sales price in Mississippi. $179,390 is our average, is the average home price. How does that happen? If you look all the way at the bottom, 95% of our mortgages are for pre-existing homes. They are not new starter homes. People are not in that business anymore for the reasons that were elucidated by the speakers previously. You can see, average income for our borrowers as a whole is around $63,000 a year. 698 credit score. You're talking about 70%. Most of them are 1 to 2 person households. 54%, women, 49% white, 43% black borrowers. So, and then the delta there would be people who click other or none on their mortgage applications. So you see we're serving a very diverse, population with our programs. And we continue to have to change those around. For example, when interest rates kind of peaked a few months ago, we had banks reach out to us and say, look, can we get your interest rate that is advantageous because it was funded by tax-exempt mortgage revenue bonds, but we don't want the down payment assistance. They're going to get it from their mom or their dad, or they saved up. Is there any way? So we created a program called Just Rate that drops, by another, I think 40 basis points from our average rate, because we don't have to account for that down payment assistance to make it even more affordable in the long term, which is a huge advantage to the borrower because you're talking about a 30-year amortizing loan. Next one, please. Just real quick on tax credits. We administer the low-income housing tax credit program in Mississippi. We've got tens of thousands of units in our compliance portfolio all around the state. The cap for Mississippi used to be around 9 million. It's gone up to 11 million in housing tax credits for next year. Those are the economic impact numbers. Housing tax credit units are available in general to people who make 60% or below the area median income. That program, as other federal programs have gone offline, is having to pick up a lot more of the lower income bands, 50% AMI and below, 30% AMI and below. But generally speaking, you're talking about working families at 60%, just a straight 60% deal. The problem with the low-income housing tax credit in Mississippi, and with any income-driven program, is, as speakers previously were talking about, we are a very low-wage state. So if you're basing it on area median income, those rents, even the ones that they're allowed to charge, make it hard to keep the lights on in those rental deals, especially in rural areas. And especially long-term, because you're talking about a 15 to 30-year compliance period. 15 years federal, 15 years federal, 15 years voluntary after that with the state that we incentivize and almost everybody takes advantage of. We can go to the next one, right? I mean, it's just kind of where projects have gone. The thing about this slide that I want to kind of focus on, though, is for rehab projects, and this is just, to kind of look at home building and the increase in cost. They've increased 27.6% since 2022 at a rate of 6.9% annually. That's just rehabbing old deals. New construction has increased at a rate of 8.1% over those years at a rate of 2% annually. It's just more expensive to build stuff now than it used to be. I heard a lot of talk about, minimum square footage, the financing side is fine. The financing side, mortgages are affordable. I know that we were in kind of a very low interest rate environment for a long time. Interest rates are going to drop again. Our program activity tells me when I look at it that the financing is there, the tools are there, the down payment assistance is there. We keep that bond money on the street at all times. The problem is inventory. This is an inventory issue. And when I work with my colleagues at the National Council of State Housing Agencies, this is not a Mississippi problem. This is a nationwide problem. You can be California, you can be Mississippi, New Mexico, Texas, Florida, Rhode Island. There's not enough new homes being built. Part of that, the decline that we really saw was after the Great Recession, 09, 10, a lot of home builder licenses went dormant. And a lot of guys that stayed in the business are not going to build for less than 350 right now because there's not enough bang for the buck. And the expenses has gone up. To your point earlier, I had some of the smart guys at my office, Senator Delano, pull a number for me that I'm going to look at real quick and tell you. In 2017, lot cost was 13.7%, and it's gone up 50% since then. So in the past 8 years now, 13.7 times, by 50%, that's 20% of your price. And that's according to the National Association of Home Builders. They ran and looked that up for me real quick. So everything's going up. It's materials, it's labor, it's lot cost, it's fees, it's all of it. And finding that affordable spot is, why we're all here today. For example, my first home was built in 1935. It was over in Belhaven, 1,390 square feet. That was for a family of 3 or 4. I'm not allowed to build that home now in most of the suburbs in the metro area because of the minimum square footage. And that little cottage was great. I loved it. Wish I still had it. But we don't do that anymore. And I think that's part of the issue. Happy to answer any questions you guys have about what we do, any other questions, other questions about any of our programs. We touch a lot. Yeah, there was a question about the tax credit for home buying. That's also funded through private activity bond cap. It's called the mortgage credit certificate. It's up to $6,000, but most people max it out, $6,000 a year federal income tax credit. And the idea is you file a revised withholding to take that into account so that you bring home more money and you have more purchasing power. You cannot combine that with a mortgage revenue bond loan because it's funded by the same federal program and it would be double dipping. But it ends up, and that's for the life of the mortgage. So really, if you don't need the down payment assistance or it ends up being a better deal. It's just a little bit harder for the lenders to wrap and borrowers to wrap their head around. I should also mention that every single one of our loan products requires homebuyer education. So we have HUD approved homebuyer education. Anybody that gets one of our mortgages has to go through that program.
Any questions by committee members? Just clarifying, you have multiple programs for first-time home buyers currently.
We do.
And also programs for not first-time home buyers. Is that
right? The Smart 6 program, which provides a $6,000 down payment assistance, because it is funded with taxable bonds, not tax exempt bonds, has a higher income limit. We did limit the income just because we are we're not trying to necessarily compete with the banks, and we are, your affordable housing finance is what we're into. But we recognize that a lot of first-time home buyers, especially in healthcare professions like nurses and stuff like that, they're just going to be over that 120% when they graduate.
And so we still want to offer some sort of down payment assistance for people. So yeah, and they don't, and there is no first time home buyer requirement on that program.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Next, we have Sherry Veazey from the Mississippi Municipal League.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I decided to forego my 65 slide PowerPoint presentation. Seriously, I will be brief today. My plan was to have a couple of mayors and just the timing didn't work out. And then I wanted to have a city planner. And I found out that they're actually in a conference right now in Hattiesburg. But if you have another hearing, I would welcome the opportunity to maybe have one of our really sharp city planners. Just to give, I'm Sherry Veazey. I'm the executive director of the Mississippi Municipal League. We currently have 293 member cities. And y'all probably know this, but in Mississippi, 85% of our cities are under 10,000 and about 52% of them are under 1,500. So we are definitely a state of small cities. I do appreciate being asked to testify at this hearing. Housing is an important issue, something that we hear a lot about from our cities and towns. I will say this, as a result of the June election, we have 122 new mayors. That's a pretty high percentage compared to what it was 4 years ago. So we're spending a lot of time right now trying to provide training and education. And one of the things we do, and if any of you have been to our annual conference in particular, we have a pretty robust education agenda. But we have a certification program that we encourage all of our new officials to go through. And one of those is a 4-hour class on zoning and planning and land use. And we have some excellent city planners that help us do that training. So we do try to provide them with some education about the importance of zoning and land use. I did talk with the chairman about looking at best practices as far as encouraging housing development. And we're certainly willing to participate in any discussion about that. When I've got a little bit more time, we can reach out to some of our cities, particularly the bigger cities, what they're doing to encourage housing development. And so I'd like to do that. I've heard some discussion today about state level guidance. And that's great. But all of you know, because you know where we stand on preemption, we wouldn't want anything to be mandated, or we don't want authority taken away from our cities. But we are trying to provide them with some tools and some education. And so I'm willing to certainly look at what our neighboring states are doing. You know, housing is an issue across the country. And I have a great relationship with my counterparts particularly in our southern states. So again, I can gather some information if that would be helpful to the committee. Again, I'm not the planning expert, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about their zoning and why they need to do that. And in general, permitting and development review for housing development, they're trying to do several things. The first thing is to ensure infrastructure capacity, and that's already been mentioned a couple of times, but cities don't have the financial capability to build. I think Senator McClendon's already mentioned it, to build out water and sewer for a new development. They struggle sometimes to do all the things they need to do with their water system. And I don't think it's realistic to expect them to increase ad valorem or their water fees to support a new development. Their permitting needs to promote safety and compliance, making sure that structures meet minimum life-saving fire and accessibility standards. And this is a big one. They're trying to protect the property value of their citizens who are already in their city. A lot of talk about the minimum square foot requirements. I can't speak to a particular city on why they've put that there, but I do know of a city in recent years that was considering a development of starter homes. And some of the property owners that owned larger homes pushed back. And so they do have to be responsive to the people who've already made a huge investment in their home and live in their city. So I don't think they're just making these decisions with no thought. It's based on what the citizens that elected them have asked them to consider. They also have to coordinate growth. Local governments use their processes to align private development with their comprehensive plan. A lot of our bigger cities have a comprehensive, some of it, our smaller ones do, a community master plan. And so they want to make sure that the developments fit into the framework of whatever that plan is. And of course, to pass legal muster, all of their planning has to be based on protection and advancement of general health, safety, and welfare of their community. Let's talk about zoning a little bit. Zoning codes are critical in order to separate incompatible land uses, protect property values, establish density and setback standards to prevent overcrowding, manage growth and infrastructure capability or capacity, preserve the neighborhood characters. And so zoning can be amended, but they do have, zoning requirements and most of the time in their comprehensive plan. And there's a reason for that. I'm not going to go through all the particulars about the planning and approval process because most of the folks in this room are well aware of that. I will say that some of our larger cities have tried to implement a process, what they're calling pre-approval, where the builder or the developer sits down with the planning department and they want to make sure that they understand what all of the needs are, what all the permitting process, everything that has to happen before it goes to the planning commission or to the governing body. And I was told by one city, if they have that pre-approval meeting and everyone signs off on what has to happen, then they try to make sure that that gets taken up in the next planning commission meeting to expedite it. But it is a very complicated process, but I think most cities are able to do it in 60 to 90 days. But there's a lot that has to be considered. So I think there's only so much you can streamline it or speed it up. But I think they try to do that. I think these cities want, if they are working with a developer and a home builder and they have met with them, they want to try to expedite the process as much as they can, but they still have a lot of things that have to be considered. Finally, I just want to say that when it comes to zoning and permitting for housing development, one size does not fit all. There are reasons why cities have the processes in place that they have. And I don't think we should try to dictate to them what that process is. But again, we're very open to the discussion about best practices that might be suggested. Again, we do a lot of training on that. We have some folks that come in and train our new elected officials about the process and what they need to consider. And we're certainly open to doing more of that because we know housing is critical. There's a shortage of housing. Anything we can do to help that, we're fine with. We'd like to participate. But again, at the end of the day, we feel that the mayor, the board, and the council has to make the determination about the best course of action for their individual community. So.
Thank you. Does any committee members have questions? Senator Lane?
Shar, you and I have worked together for many, many, many years on many issues. And one one of the issues that we've had different opinions on is on building codes and the enforcement of building codes and why that is important. And I understand some of the municipalities' perspectives on it. I know the counties have been adamantly or more opposed to it than the municipalities. But is it safe to say that a majority of our cities that are greater than 10,000 in population have a building code office or someone who performs a building code inspection function?
I would say yes. For the larger, over 10,000 cities, yeah.
Okay, what can we do to help municipalities where they do not have building code officials that are inspecting homes and issuing occupancy permits? What can we do as a state to help those municipalities and those with those types of functions?
I don't know that I have an answer for you, but I do know that it is a matter of a lot of our smaller towns, they don't have someone that can be the building code inspector. And so if you put something out there, somebody's got to make sure that whatever you're wanting to happen at the local level is happening with buildings. And so that's the big thing, is just not having a person available that understands or that's been trained to enforce whatever codes. And, you know, when we passed building codes, I think it was right after Katrina, there was an opt-out provision in that law. And I think most of the smaller ones probably did opt out. Coincidentally, the Building Code Council met yesterday and adopted the 2024 international building codes with some exemptions like they always do. And so because we have these new mayors, one of the things we're going to try to do pretty quickly is make sure they understand what's in those codes and they need to adopt them. And I guess just providing some training. I don't really know. I'd have to look at some other states, like some of our neighboring states that have a lot of small towns like we do, to see what they do with any kind of building codes. Because if you've opted out of building codes, you don't have there's not building codes in your town.
Yeah.
So the little ones have.
I agree with you on that. And the point is that we need to find a way to entice with a carrot more municipalities to adopt building codes and just more jurisdictions in general to adopt building codes and actually enforce those codes for a lot of reasons. But let me just move past that for a little bit. You talked about the comprehensive plan. I look at a comprehensive plan and zoning as being very much related because your strategic plan is really how you set forth and how you're going to do your infrastructure or your roadway projects or any type of projects that you have for capital expense in nature. Zoning usually then follows right behind that.
Yes.
And what I'm seeing more and more of especially on the coast, but I have a feeling that this is pervasive everywhere, is that municipalities are having to address their zoning maps and their comprehensive plans more regularly because of the changes that they're seeing in the neighborhoods, just how the legal definition of a change of a characteristic of a neighborhood is moving at a lot faster pace than it was 15 or 20 years ago. And where we see that the most is in social media, where you have so many social media accounts that are popping up to oppose every single thing. And you talked about NIMBYism just a few minutes ago, where the bigger houses don't want smaller houses. But that goes back to somewhat of what your strategic plan looks like and what your zoning looks like. So as a developer does come forward, makes a planning commission application to change a zoning for whatever its needed use is, it could be everyone in this world could agree, or in this state could agree that this is reasonable and practical. But if there's a group of 45 in a Facebook page,
Yes.
they're the ones that are going to be the vocal minority that's going to shut everything
The
down.
keyboard warriors that we like. to
Yeah,
call.
so my point is that I feel like we need to give our municipalities more support for updating their municipal zoning ordinances in a more timely manner so that it is easier to show that, that either by use or um, I can't think of the word that I'm looking for right now, by right. But you can do these developments by right, and then we don't have to come in and ask for as many variances or as many zoning changes because we've updated the plan more
Right.
consistently. The other thing that's been discussed, and it goes back to what I was talking about with respect to building codes, is that in the past, there's been some discussions about giving the PDDs a little more either funding or a little more latitude in providing these types of services to smaller cities, whether it be hire a third-party engineering company that does the inspection processes for the building code side of it, or for providing the technical expertise that's necessary to do an update of the zoning maps and the comprehensive studies within a 7 or 8 year period versus a 12 to a 15-year period that we see now. Do you see that the PDDs would be more helpful in those discussions, or do you have any comments regarding the use of PDDs as an instrument to help advance some of the issues that we're looking at in this committee?
I think there are some PDDs that they do a lot of that already. You know, some of the cities hire them. Some of the bigger cities will hire the planning and development district to come in and help them do a comprehensive plan or look at their zoning. Some of the other PDDs, their focus maybe is on other things, but I think that's something to discuss. I think that has some merit because, the problem is some of the smaller towns are not going to be able to afford, if you would give them some funding where they could do this for free for some of our smaller cities, I think that would encourage a lot more of them to consider a comprehensive plan. Some of them that just have a really small budget, I mean, that's just not something they're going to prioritize. But if the funding were there for the PDDs to help do that, I think that would be something good for y'all to consider. Another thing that I would like for you to think about, and it may exist. I didn't really have time to do a lot of research on it, but somebody mentioned earlier a study that was done years ago on housing. Maybe the legislature needs to look at funding a statewide housing assessment study. So, you know, we know where the issues are. I think a lot of it's been brought out today, but that might be something for y'all to think about.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, as we move forward, I would like to talk with you a little bit more and the rest of the committee about how we can utilize those PDDs in a better role to help with the startup cost or the startup of these types of divisions within our cities. Because in the past, when we were looking at this post-Katrina, we saw that the municipalities, while they would want to do it, just the enormity of the task of setting this up within their particular jurisdiction is always something that is a tremendous challenge. The maintenance of it is not as difficult as the initial startup cost.
Thank you very much. And thank you. I think just to touch on a couple of things, I greatly appreciate you coming in today and even though mayors were tied up in different events,
Yeah,
but
for Halloween, I guess. I don't know.
it would be great if you could get information from a few different ones showing the different challenges that they face and the little conversations that I've had, which has not been extensive. There's a range of different issues from infrastructure and the ability to expand water or sewer networks. In Hattiesburg, we've had very few new subdivisions, but we are looking to do more infill. And I know that they are in the process of having a few house plans for that infill that are pre-approved by the city so that if a builder chooses one of those, then they bypass a lot of the, not necessarily permitting, but a lot of the time to get plans approved. But one consistent thing that we've heard is the time for permitting, the time for reviews and just moving a process along. We've seen this where other states like California and Texas have passed laws encouraging a faster time frame. As MML moves forward, I would love to see a best practices on how to speed up those processes, how cities can learn from each other on ways to whatever their individual needs are and their individual requirements, that they can move quickly on the process.
As you and I talked the first day you told me about the hearing, I'm definitely very willing to try to talk with some of our cities, find out what their issues are, and see if we can get some type of agreement from some of them about how they might be able to expedite the process. I'll definitely do that for you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have our Insurance Commissioner, Mike Cheney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For expediency today, Deputy Commissioner David Browning and Rating Director Andy Case are going to do the presentation for you. And we have a PowerPoint. It will be on the screen and we've handed them out. So at this time, I'll introduce Deputy Commissioner David Browning. David.
Where's the clock? Is that it? Got it. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you to the committee for giving us an opportunity to talk a little bit about what's driving insurance availability and affordability of insurance. And one of the things we do, we go around talking about this, and a lot of people don't realize, show some of these weather charts that things that are driving costs. And when you chart each of these severe weather events, you can't even see the state of Mississippi on this chart. And when you look at it individually and you see all that, this is just so far in 10 months this year. We could provide charts going 10 years back, but look at this chart. Look at how many severe weather events you have, 100 and something tornadoes, a lot of wind, 500 and something severe wind events, and over 100, hail events in there. And even last weekend had a tornado that touched down in Goshen, which is highly unusual to have a tornado that far south. So that's what it looks like as far as the number of tornadoes. Like I mentioned before, had 109 reports of tornadoes that have occurred so far in 10 months of this year. And you don't hear a lot about it. Fortunately, none of these have been overly catastrophic, but they still, you see the kind of the Pine Belt region, how many that just kind of flow up through that area have occurred. This right here, and you've heard it, let's talk about it before. You've heard other presenters talk about the CPI index, and this really is a major factor in the cost of insurance and what's driving inflation. Back right there around COVID or subsequent to COVID, you see CPI got down to close to zero. Insurance companies a lot of times adjusted their rates to account for that after that, and see subsequent to then the CPI got up to almost 8%. And so what we've been seeing in the market here recently and a lot of the high rates is because of that inflation. Typically premiums lag a couple of years behind the CPI and how it functions and stuff like that. But you see it's gone down. Now it's around 2.9%. We are starting to see an easing in the market. I know this is a housing, but auto, just the other day we had 1,000, I guess it's going to impact around 1,000 people, anywhere from a 3 to 7% rate decrease on auto, and hoping homeowners is going to follow that because a lot of the cost to replace, and insurance is largely based upon replacement cost value. And you may have a house that's valued at $300,000, but it may cost $450,000 to replace it if you have a total loss, because a lot of the replacement costs. 84% of lumber is imported from Canada. 80-something% of the asphalt shingles are imported from Canada and other countries. And so that, you know, you have tariffs into play, and that's kind of driving costs right now. We'll kick it over to Andy Case. Andy at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners is doing a national study on the availability and affordability of homeowners insurance throughout the United States. And they're looking at on a U.S. basis and also on a state-by-state basis. And Andy's been heavily involved in that committee. We have weekly calls, and Andy can provide an update on kind of what they're doing in that committee, and then talk about possible solutions to this going forward. So, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Again, looking at this next slide, kind of continuing on with David's conversation. These are states that have lost, where insurers have lost money. We're talking about underwriting profit, pure underwriting profit. Mississippi's made this list 3 of those 10 years, most recently in 23. Expanding on that a little bit, this is kind of a busy slide, and I've got this also demonstrated on other slides shortly. It's easier to see, but if you're looking at this, kind of pay attention to the HO5 and HO8 policies. Those are the primary policies that that we see in Mississippi for a lot of our properties. Basically, if you look at the far right side, that first dark green or blue green represents the change from 2018 to 19. It's roughly 3.5%. If you'll look next, there's a small orange line there. That's 19 to 20. Not a whole lot went on there. But then, as David mentioned a minute ago, insurers typically their pricing has a lag of 12 to 18 months behind market forces. So you'll see in 20 to 24, it went up about 6.5%, up to 8%. Those two combined, 2022 and 2024 are combined about 14.5%. And we'll see how that compares to the rest of the country here shortly. This slide is very interesting. This is premium per $1,000 of coverage A. Coverage A is your dwelling limit on your home, okay? That's the brick and mortar limit. What's interesting here is we have consumers contact us often, and probably if you're in this room, you've got a homeowner's insurance policy, you've seen your dwelling A limits go up. And people question that. Why is the insurer raising my rebuild cost on my home? A lot of consumers are a little wary of that. Their concern is, are they just raising the limits to get additional premium? But if you will look at this, the studies done by the NAIC and the data we received last year actually show that as your dwelling value goes up, you're paying less per $1,000 of coverage. Now, why is that? Well, first of all, as the dwelling value cost to rebuild goes up, the insurer's exposed to more. They have to account for that. But they also recognize that actuarially, statistically, there's a smaller chance that they're going to lose that entire house due to a tornado or fire. So while we are paying more, as the value of that house goes up, the value that you're paying per $1,000 of coverage actually starts decreasing. This is a comparison of Mississippi pure loss ratios to the national market. And we look at loss ratios. There's a number of ways to look at this. The most accurate way for us as regulators would be the company's paid losses divided by the earned premium. Why is that? Because it takes out reserving and a lot of other factors that really can kind of cloud the picture for us. Most companies, from what I see at my desk, a permissible loss ratio varies from company to company. I would say the average is about 54%. They're looking to make 46 cents on the dollar. That they'd be really happy with that. If you'll look at the slide, at the graph on the right, from 2020 to 2024, they hit that target once. Taking that at a different angle, return on net worth for an insurer, most S&P 500 companies are shooting for 14%. They would love that. Insurance is no different. They would like to do that, but due to the volatility of what they do, what they sell, how they operate, that's not achieved very often. Looking at Mississippi, specifically, these orange graphs here, we had a good year in 2024, and we're seeing that. That's the first time in 5 years that companies have actually hit the return on equity for This is cancellations for non-payment. This shows us what kind of pressure pricing is putting on the consumer, the policyholder. Now, what we don't know in this is how many people were canceled for non-payment because they couldn't afford it versus they were shopping. We don't have that information. But regardless, you can see the pressure starts applying in 2020. 2020 and 21 were tough years for this market. It started, the cost started going up for insurers, and so did the premiums. So right now, you're looking at about 40 cancellations for non-payment per 1,000 policies. This information only goes through 2022. The information that we got through the NAIC unfortunately takes us through 2022. This was a huge monumental undertaking to try to, as you can imagine, get this volume of data from every insurance company representing 80 to 90% of the market share across the country. Took us some time to get it, took a lot of legal wrangling to get it. Now that we have it, we've scrubbed the data. I was on a call this afternoon where we talked about data sharing agreements, and moving forward in January, we will request this information again through 2025. So that'll be the most current information we have. But this takes us through a really difficult pricing period. Average homeowner rate changes in Mississippi. This is basically the same information you saw a moment ago. It's just presented a little bit differently. If you look at this, these states, the reason we looked at this, these states are in our southeast zone of the NAIC. There's 12 states represented. We don't have Puerto Rico in here, but these states share a common risk with us. They share common weather patterns. Some of these states also have coastal exposures. So when we look at 23 to 24, Mississippi's cumulative rate change over the 2-year period was 15.6%, which is probably third best to our neighbors. Sometimes when things are going bad, what do? You want to look to your neighbors, see how they're performing. And we do have conversations of what they're seeing in the market and how they're reacting. 2019 to 2024 is a little broader picture. Okay. That's the whole 5-year snapshot. We're at 24.9%. There's a lot of information here. You'll see some states like Florida at 14.8%, 23 and 24. But then you'll see a much wider swing for 19 and 24. There's a lot of political factors coming to that. You've got elections, you've got hurricanes, you've got a lot of things that unfortunately come in to drive this price. When you look at what we've done, we're at 24.9%. We're pretty consistent, and you can see the drop we had in 23, 24. So we're kind of seeing it start to trend down somewhat now.
Real quick, does that include not admitted carriers also?
No,
Not
this is
admitted-
admitted only. This is
admitted
admitted
only.
only. Admitted only. That's
And
correct.
the wind pool, including the wind pool.
Wind pool is not in here. These are admitted insurers outside of the wind pool.
Okay, thank
Because
you.
this is a statewide glance.
Thank you.
Now, what's driving the cost? I can tell you from insurance, I've been doing this a long time. You've got CPO premises liability, you've got broken water pipes, you've got all these things. In this state, it is wind and it is convective storm. We have an insurer that primarily writes on the coast, an admitted insurer, and I had a conversation with them and said, why would you not write north? He said, I can't afford to write on the coast and write north. He said, if I go north, it's death by 1,000 cuts. We have a serious convective storm problem. Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, Louisiana, we all share the same issue. So when you look at this, all these events, these are billion-dollar events that affected Mississippi. We haven't had much cyclone activity, but look at the severe storm in green. The severe storm total loss cost from a frequency standpoint equal what we would have had with cyclones and hurricanes. That's what's driving our costs right there, and it's 45% of the cost. Now, these next slides are kind of busy. They talk about inflation a little bit and some of the market factors that we're dealing with. So I'll kind of draw your attention to a few things. First of all, rebuilding costs are rising. We know that. 10-year analysis from October 14 to October 24 shows that material costs and labor costs both have risen exponentially. Residential construction costs rose by 63.7%. Over the past 5 years, the annual cost growth doubled, averaging around 7%. Lumber prices were the sharpest increase at 43.5% since 2014. If you've done any sort of remodeling, if you've been to Home Depot, if you've been to Lowe's, this is not something you know. 2 weeks. I once had a second job where I built homes, and I've still got some accounts at some material stores. I bought paint last week. I just happened to look at my account for the paint that I bought, the exact same paint I bought for my house 5 years ago. I paid $27 for it 5 years ago. It was $72 a gallon last week. The other issue we can't really control, and it's an unknown, is tariffs. We've got an administration that's talking a lot about tariffs, and we're going back and forth on that. We as an office have pushed back on the tariffs because of the uncertainty, but we're starting to see and hear from other states that they're starting to feel the pressure from insurers that tariffs are becoming more and more of an issue. 70% of our imported sawmill lumber comes from Canada. That is subject to a 14.5% tariff. 71% of our imported lime and gypsum, which is basically drywall, is coming from Mexico. Furthermore, along these same lines, in 2024, we had 27 confirmed U.S. billion-dollar weather and climate events. That follows 23, where we set a record for 28 separate billion-dollar events. The total cost from those events was $182 billion. If you look at a 10-year average, this is exceeding $1.4 trillion. And what's interesting, when you go back 44 years total, we're talking about $2.9 trillion in losses. Half of that came from the last 10 years. You can discount the previous 34 years before that. Homeowners insurance right now faces the greatest affordability pressure, making it the most urgent for loss prevention technologies. What this means is that carriers are looking for ways to underwrite better, ways to control costs, and ways to build better. In a prior life, I worked for a large insurer for 24 years, and I can tell you from my experience, you can't price your way out of a bad risk. At some point, you have to address the risk, and insurers are turning to that now. This next slide talks about a report from the Treasury Department. It's more what we've been talking about. Insurance premiums per policy have increased almost 9% faster than the rate of inflation. Consumers living in 20% of zip codes with the highest expected annual losses from climate-related perils have paid $2,321 in premiums on average. That's 82% more than the other 20% outside of the zip codes that don't experience severe convective weather. Basically, these areas had a higher frequency of claims, severity of claims, $24,000 on average compared to about $19,000 for lowest risk areas. Now, you ask, why is that? Why would an area in a high risk have an average severity of $24,000, an area in a low risk have an average severity of $19,000? Typically, when a storm hits, it drives material and labor. You're going to have a surge in price. You're not going to have that in these other areas as often as you have it in the high risk areas. Next, talk a little bit about mitigation. I just mentioned a minute ago that insurers are looking for ways to address the risk. They understand they're crossing a critical axis where insurance is becoming unaffordable for a lot of people. So how do you address the risk? One of the things we want to talk about was the Strength Mississippi Homes program. This program was funded last year, July 1st, and it was established by regulation. And basically, it's designed to provide wind mitigation to a roof. And this is not rocket science. There's some other states that have done it. We'll kind of talk about it. What is a fortified roof? The best way I can describe this is a fortified roof is designed to keep water out. As an old insurance claim person, I was responsible for 5 states that I managed. Anytime a shingle is removed from a roof and water gets to the deck seams are not overlapped. They're butted up to each other. When water gets to the deck seams, I'm going to owe for shingles. I'm going to owe for insulation. It's going to come through the lighting in the ceiling. I'm going to owe for electrical. I'm going to owe for paint, cabinets, hardwood floors. And if the person's out of the house, I owe them for a hotel and meals until we can get it repaired. Now we've got 5 or more trade skills. I've got 20% overhead and profit on top of that. If I can keep the water out of the house and keep it outside the home, I can take a $25,000 claim and pay it and be done as opposed to $70,000 or $80,000. Fortified roof is about a nail pattern. It's about a wind and hail impact resistant shingle. And it's primarily about sealing the deck seams to keep the water out. And there's a process to do that. We tested this past year. As I said, our funding was approved July 1. We initiated a test phase January 1. Lot of input from other states that are doing this. Louisiana's doing it, Alabama's doing it. We has a lot of experts in this field kind of helping us with it. We ended up attempting to mitigate 28 homes through a random lottery along the coast. Those 28 homes were successfully mitigated. We did a post-survey study. Those homeowners that participated averaged 17.5% savings on their wind portion of premium, which if you're on the coast, you understand that's a big portion of premium. So that is one measure that we feel we need to look at. Mitigation is now, I think it's current in 5 states. It's been introduced in legislation and made available through another 11 states right now. So this is a hot issue. We suspended funding, that the legislature suspended funding on that program July 1st, 2025. So currently it is on hold. We're not doing any work in the area of mitigation. Along those lines, we are not the experts in this. Smart Home America is. They are the marketing and educational and rollout arm for mitigation. They are involved in this in every state in the country doing it. So we really relied heavily on them to help us understand what to do and how to do it. I've been involved in mitigation a long time. I've been involved in Alabama's program since its inception. Having said that, I know a lot. I'm not an expert. I am not. The folks at Smart Home America are, and we've relied on them heavily to help us roll this out. Julie Shire Wooders, the president of Smart Home America, recently in an article a few weeks ago, she was quoted as saying, Smart Home America has worked closely with Commissioner Cheney's office to kickstart this mitigation program. And we believe it was off to the right track until the funding was cut. She went on to say, you know, Mississippi's a black hole. They need to catch up. There should be no reason. We have the same risk as Louisiana and Alabama. Both of those states have very robust programs. Ours was in an initial phase funded with $5 million. I think Louisiana's is funded somewhere to the tune of 12 or 15 million, and Alabama as well. So that's something we have got to catch up to and work hard on. And I believe that we'll get there and hopefully have something we can work with this coming year. Other solutions, not to be all doom and gloom, but there are some other issues we're looking at along with other states. One is ACV roof schedules. As I said earlier, roofs have cost us a tremendous amount of money. It's basically convective storms and hail. We've got companies rolling out ACV roof schedules. They've responded to us. We have told them that some of your policyholders will give back a little coverage if they can get a break in premium, and they're doing that. So I personally went to an ACV roof schedule on my home. It pays me replacement costs for my roof through year 15. If I suffer a loss after year 15, I get paid actual cash value only with no recoverable depreciation. It saved me $1,400 a year. So as I'm sitting at my kitchen table, I'm doing the math on this. I'm trying to determine what are the chances I'm going to lose this roof in 15 years. If I do, I will have saved $1,400 a year by the time that happens. If I'm smart with that money, put it up, I'm okay. But these are the type of solutions we're asking insurers to provide. Also, stated value policies. As I stated earlier, dwelling values are going up. Not the values, but really the cost to rebuild are going up. We've got a number of consumers that would like to have some input in that, and we've had some insurers respond to that. We've told them you may be at risk of underinsuring if you do that, but if you need to do it to bring that premium down, that's an option. Higher deductible offerings. We are not seeing many policies right now. Gone are the days of a $2,500 standard wind deductible or $1,500. They just don't exist anymore. Quite frankly, we tell consumers to shy away from that anyway. Insurance was meant to protect you from catastrophic financial loss. A $1,500, $2,500 deductible is not what you want. That's not what does that, and it does affect the price. We've got some emerging parametric products we're looking at. Parametric products are not fully indemnified products, but they do fill a gap. There's some companies offering that. A lot of states are looking at this, and it's been used in the commercial space a while, and we're looking to possibly bring it into the residential market as well. And at the end of the day, the biggest issue is increased competition. We need more companies writing business here. They have to feel like they can come in here and compete and make some sort of reasonable return, and we're working really hard to do that. In conclusion, we face the exact same climate risk that other states do. In fact, it's probably enhanced when you look at us compared to some of our neighbors. We face the same inflationary pressures as other states, but at the end of the day, our statute basically says that our responsibility is to ensure that rates are not excessive, inadequate, unfairly discriminatory. We've got to be actuarially sound, because if we also don't give the company the rate they need, If you have a large scale Katrina type disaster, we need to make sure these companies have the capital to come through and pay those claims and honor the promises they made to their policyholders. That's all we've got. Any questions?
Questions by committee members? You do? Senator McClendon?
Thank you, Mr. Case, and thank you, Mr. Cheney, David, for the presentation. I do have one thing that gets me, and I've been in insurance for 32 years, selling homeowners and auto and health life, then went to commercial. Do commercial losses affect homeowner losses?
They have the same risk perils, but I'm gonna be honest with you, and they do, yes, to answer your question, but I'm seeing from my desk as the property casualty director for rates, commercial is a different creature. We're seeing a lot of drivers of commercial loss, and it's bigger. It's bigger than a brick and mortar. Commercial struggling right now. It is struggling to make money. We see the loss ratios these companies are filing. You know, as a former business owner, I sympathize. There's some things, quite frankly, that Louisiana has done to address this statutorily in their last session to try to make it a little friendlier for businesses to be able to operate and not be subject to these large, enormous verdicts. But what's driving a lot of that is quite frankly litigation. Those policies are big. People know they're big, and they quite frankly represent quite a payday for a lot of folks that are subject to loss.
Do we have many companies that will write a roof for a brand new customer that's over 15 years old?
Well, they can't cancel or non-renew based on roof age, but what they can do is refuse to insure on a new policy. And what we're doing is we've got a few calls on that. We're asking the carrier, and we're handling case by case basis, but if a consumer feels like they have been denied a policy to roof age, we're pushing back and telling the company we'd like a physical inspection of that roof. Because honestly, I dealt with actually a friend of mine last year who has an 8-year-old roof, and the roof had deteriorated with trees over it, a lot of streaking and whatnot. That's the first sign of degradation of a shingle, and insurers know that, and that you get wind lift and it won't seal. So it doesn't matter if it's 8 years old or 15 years old. We're asking companies, if that happens to a consumer, to go out and actually inspect that roof physically. And to my knowledge, I don't think we've had one that was not overturned yet.
Thank you for that. And I know it's all done case by case. But is it fair to a consumer to allow a roofing company or a shingle company to say this is a 30-year shingle, this is a 40-year shingle, knowing good and well that when it gets 15 years and you sell that house?
That's a sore spot with us. And let me tell you a little about going back to mitigation. The mitigated or fortified roof is a product born of IBHS, the Institutes for Business Home Safety. They are funded by the insurance industry, and they're funded for one reason. Let's find a way to make things better so that they hold up better to weather convective storms and whatnot. IBHS a few years ago built a roof farm. They've got roof farms across the US. It's just basically a hip roof about the size of this table, and they're studying the effects of shingles and weather, rain, acid rain, heat, humidity. And what they are finding is these 30-year shingles are 15-year shingles. And that is a problem. I talked to Dr. Ann Cope, who's one of the head engineers and scientists there. And she says that the shingle manufacturers are paying attention, and they're asking that when they test their shingles to give them a call first before they publish the results. So they're sensitive to it, but that is a problem.
But yet they're still advertising.
Still advertising.
Can you? Well, I appreciate what y'all do. I've asked enough. Ice storm of 94, you don't even go back to that. What a catastrophic event that was up in North Mississippi. Are we the new Tornado Alley?
I'm sorry to hear that last.
Are we the new Tornado Alley?
Yeah, we are. I think David showed a slide earlier. So let's talk about that. 2025, we've had 109. I don't know what that is a month. 11. We got 2 more months to go. Our record's 125. And I can tell you that before I was a property casualty rating director, I was over consumer affairs, so I had to track the weather events and whatnot. We have not had a year under 90 tornadoes and count in the last 10 years. And I think 3 of those years we set consecutive records. And until last year, we have become known as the new Tornado Alley. I was talking to Commissioner Glenn Mulready recently of Oklahoma, and we handed the baton back to them for the time being.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Delano?
Andy, I want to say thank you to you and David for your leadership on these issues and the fact that you got a glowing recommendation from Smart Home America is no small feat. Julie Woodward Shayu is by far the number one person that we've worked with over the years. It took 15 years to get that recommendation from her, so I'm glad that you're getting there. And I appreciate your continued efforts on that. Last session, there was some discussion about how do we treat or how do we help people in the areas outside of the 5 coastal counties for mitigation. There were some things that were discussed, some things that that needed to be studied a little bit more. But we have another program that MEMA has been running for a while now for this safe room program. It's not attached to IBHS, but there's some similarities that are there. Have y'all looked at what can we do for the rest of the state outside of the high wind load areas that are practical? And what's going to be the approach shot this year?
Yeah, I've had some discussions, Senator. Thank you. Wind is wind. I don't care if it's hurricane or if it's convective storm, if it's straight line or tornado, or whatever it is. Wind is wind. The discounts that these folks, these 28 recipients, received after their homes were fortified, those discounts are mandated statutorily over the whole state, all the way up to South Haven. They apply equally. So this thing can be done to scale. It's funding. It's funding. If we get the correct funding, we can take it anywhere. We can take it, going back to Commissioner Mulready, Oklahoma, they're rolling their program out. They don't have a coastline. So they're trying to figure out where their initial pressures were, where to start. They took this same PCMI data that I have, and they have identified, you may have seen this on one of David's slides, these typical tornado paths. They keep taking the same track year after year after year. Well, they concentrated their efforts on those zip codes that are repeatedly in the path of a tornado. So to answer your question, we can take it statewide. The funding's there. Wind is wind. These things, the standard applies regardless. Our contractors who are working versus on the coast are doing the same thing in Oklahoma. Mississippi contractors are working in Oklahoma right now. So it can be done anywhere.
Yeah, Andy, thank you. I'm glad to hear you say that. So we are going to focus on roofs. That's what our program is going to work on, is just focusing on fortifying roofs or improving the condition of roofs and then documenting the age of those roofs, whether it be through the IBHS program or through the city from some other means. All right, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate your continued work on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jennifer Hall with the Mississippi Manufactured Housing Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So glad to be here today with y'all. I did hand out in the blue folder. If you'll get the blue folder, I've got a lot of information. I'm going to try to speed through it. Senator Delano, I wanted to tell you that conversation about what small municipalities came up at our building code council. Mark Roberts with the ICC said that in Louisiana at the parishes, they are subcontracting that out. They are allowing, it's my understanding that municipalities do have that authority to do that. So they can afford, so they're actually hiring a third-party engineer to do that, and they're letting them charge those fees.
Okay, that's great. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, before the commissioner walks out the room and the rest of his staff, something that we also need to look at in regard to this is what do we do with the rating bureau? and how does the rating, what value does the rating bureau provide for our municipalities? And what value, how does that translate down to our rating system, which thereby lowers the insurance premium cost for homeowners, or at least it should? And I know there's been some discussions about that, but I think that's something that we should look at in conjunction with the efforts that the commissioner has had, from what I've understood, for trying to improve upon our rating bureau and how we can make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for the buck on that. So thank you for bringing that back up. And I just wanted to mention that while the commissioner was still here, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I really wanted to talk about MMHA has been working over the last 3 years with the Municipal League, and we have gone to their annual conference. And the reason is because there's so many different definitions for factory-built housing. Y'all have mentioned them today: ADU, tiny houses. You've got all kinds of different people coming up with a new name. Well, because that falls under factory-built housing, our statute actually does not define a lot of those. Our State Fire Marshal's office is updating their MH5 regulations right now, and our association's been working with them, and they're actually going to define a tiny home. But dwelling is very, very important, because in their definition, in their MH5, they are going to be defining dwelling. And that's very, very important, because we just updated the modular definition in House Bill 999 this last session. The reason why we did that is because I was getting calls from cities across the state of people who were going and buying a shed, getting a permit for a shed, taking it to their house, put it in their backyard, and then converting it into a dwelling. That is not a safe structure. But I'm here to tell you that's happening a lot around our state, a lot. And why? It's because what everybody's talking about today, they can't afford anything else. But these sheds are not cheap. There are people paying $65,000, $75,000 for a shed. And so they asked, cities ask us what we do. I met with the State Fire Marshal's office, Mark Lampton, the attorney. We came up with a new modular definition to try to give the State Fire Marshal's office a little bit of regulatory authority. Just today, I received an email from Tim Fagerberg, who heads up that department, of a customer who bought one of those structures, and she was told it was a tiny home. It was not built to any code. And guess what? Entergy would not turn on the power. Good for them. So and I appreciate y'all listening to us last session. It is so important to me that if someone is going to be sold a structure that's going to be used as a dwelling, that it's built to a residential code. There's only the ICC or the IRC code or the HUD code. Those are the two residential code. Now, we can't dictate to what people are living in. I can take you right out to the reservoir, to the campground out there, and there are people living in RVs out there and have been for 26, 28 years. But that's not supposed to be used as a dwelling. So with that, modular homes, we didn't even have a definition of modular homes till Katrina. Haley Barbour, after Katrina, the coast were dying for structures. And we even have a condominium unit down there that was built to mods. So what I gave you in your packet was a lot of different definitions. Modular homes, we're seeing more modular homes built to Mississippi, a lot in North Mississippi. We have modular manufacturers that are modular homes are built to the same code now. In January, they will have to meet the 2024 code that we just adopted. They've been being built to the 2018 code. Most of the modular homes being sold in our state are running $300,000 to $400,000. Those are going to be over 3,000 to 3,500 square feet home. They're huge. But there are different types of homes, and I just wanted to give you that tiny house. So we are creating in MH5, which will be coming out, a definition for tiny home. And again, if that tiny home is being used for a dwelling, a permanent dwelling, it should be built to the ICC code. I wanted to just show you a little bit of, so Mississippi hosts the largest outdoor factory-built housing show on the coast. Now, it's March 16th through 18th. It's about a $3 to $4 million income to Biloxi. They love having us there. We love being there. This year, we'll be setting up about 57 to 60 homes. We have a lot more developers attending this also. But I just wanted to show you a few of these tiny homes. But please note that a lot of these tiny homes, only one of these tiny homes is built to the HUD code. The other is built to the RV code, the ANSI code. So that's not supposed to be a permanent dwelling. It's supposed to be used for, but they certainly can use them as like vacation lake homes. So this is just a little bit of video. Just wanted to show you some inside. A lot of people, that's a big concept. Tiny homes, I understand. In the Oxford area, they're looking at doing a development with tiny homes up there for some of the graduate students. So this is a concept. Some of the communities, we actually have a tiny home subdivision that I'm going to show you down on the coast momentarily. But some of you may have seen them on TV, but this is a wonderful product that is meeting some needs for some single or small families, some starter homes. These are not cheap. These run from 75 to 95,000, and they're usually not, but about 500 square feet. Some are a little bit more square footage. The HUD home has to start at 400 square feet. That's the minimum for a HUD code home, but tiny homes can be smaller than that. If they have a HUD label, they have to have a minimum of 400 square feet. I want to show you, you're going to get to a double decker in just a second. I bet you didn't know we could do double deckers, tiny homes, but we can. But you know, our homes are evolving. And one thing that you have as you're watching this piece, this is not going to be on the slideshow. I wanted to put in your packet. So last year at Washington, D.C., each year HUD asked for an innovative housing conference. And so different entities, different industries set up homes. Last year we did duplexes because HUD now approved duplexes for manufactured homes. You had a multi-section duplex, but now they have approved a single section duplex, which is a 1 bedroom on each side. Both of these units went to Pennsylvania, to the UMH properties, but a lot of communities are using this because they can have more housing for rental properties in their communities or subdivision. Let me go up. I'm going to go on. So here is another, that was the double decker. They have a little deck there on the side that's built by Cavco Industry. That home right there runs about $88,000. Different tiny homes, just want to give you that. Then I gave you the glossary of the definitions. So we have met. Why is it important that we go meet with municipalities? In our smaller towns, and even in Jackson, people are leaving because they can't find affordable housing. Jackson recently changed its zoning 2 years ago, and I've been working with them for over 2 years. Churches are buying dilapidated properties and tearing down the old houses. And so we have come up with, and you're going to see this in your packet, one of my manufacturers has come up with a developer series. And these are for small, narrow lots, and they can help municipalities take dilapidated and eyesore area and come up with affordable housing. The Johnny B. Good, which is this home right here, is one where you've been working with the city of Jackson. And that is a 1,350 square foot home. And the turnkey with us building a front porch, side porch, brick skirting that home, doing a little gravel driveway for them, that end price will be $150,000. So we are looking, again, we will work with anyone. And I think the last 3 years we have presented at Municipal, we've had standing room only at our presentations because they're wanting to know what can we do. Some people have looked at container homes, whether it's a container home, whether it's an ADU. My only concern is that what code is it built to or renovated to meet? Because I do think it's important that we have safe, affordable housing, not just affordable housing, but that it's safe, affordable housing. So this is one that is, I believe that is in Ocean Spring. It's a factory built housing in subdivision. You'll see a lot of the Katrina cottages. This developer took a lot of those Katrina cottages and made a nice little subdivision out of that. So this is in the city of Knoxville. This is actually called a cross mod. It's a new term. It is a HUD code home. So Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae have gotten very interested in our industry over the last 3 or 4 years, but they wanted a more residential look to our homes. And so they have requested the 512 roof pitch. They've requested garages put with them. So Clayton Homes worked with them and they came up with this subdivision. Again, this new product is called Cross Mod. It is a HUD, but it has the different, and then inside it's totally trim and textures, all sheet rock throughout. You have and we talked about this, are residential codes, about the one, we've been focusing on, and that's very important. I also gave you our quick facts in there, which shows you about the cost of our homes. Why do people choose manufactured housing? Most people choose manufactured housing who live in rural areas and and that's because they don't have to deal with the zoning, to be honest with you. And I respect cities. I respect what they're trying to do. But I think more and more cities are open because they realize people are leaving because they have to have, I call it workforce housing. And many of you have brought that up today. You can attract an industry, but if you don't have housing for those people to live in, they're not going to be going. And not everybody wants to drive an hour one way to go to work. So our square footage, we have that on there. It's about $81 for a single section home and about $90 for a multi-section home. Again, because they're built in factory, you don't have a lot of extra waste with their homes. Just wanted to show you a different, I'm going to try to go forth. So we started 4 years ago. I'm going to let you listen to this and I'll tell you about it. This is a modular home in Raymond. So we started our Facebook at Mississippi Manufactured Housing Association. Last year, we reached over 4 million. That was almost double what our national association did. And we did it through these testimonies. We do not script these people. We do homeowners award each year, $2,500, one in North, Central, South. And we do that to get these testimonies of these people buying manufactured housing. You know, the one thing I really wish, and I want to talk to Scott Spivey about it because I used to serve on the Mississippi Home Corporation Board of Directors. We used to have a designated seat on that board for manufactured housing, because I do wish that some of their home funds could be more used, that manufactured housing could apply for that. I think that would help a lot more. We are still in that price range of single sections. Certainly you can buy a single section home, a 3-bedroom for 80 to 90,000, but you also can buy a 1,400 square foot home still in between that 150 to 170. And those are certainly workable, affordable means. And so our industry continues to evolve. We want to work with people. One thing I will tell you, when we had the tornadoes in Amory and Rolling Fork, Samaritan's Purse came in and used manufactured housing to get, right now it's sitting at over 120 families. I've got their lives started back. They didn't have to wait on insurance, didn't have to wait on a lot of things. They didn't want to leave their area. They wanted to live in that area, but they couldn't wait to build. So I do think as we move forward with this, I do want to make sure that modular and manufactured housing and other types of factory-built housing are in that equation too. Because I think when we look at, we want to be able to serve all Mississippians. I don't want to ever dictate to a Mississippian what they want to live in or what they have to live in. I think that should be their choice. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions by committee members? Do all of these different types of homes that you gave us definitions for qualify for traditional financing, or do they vary in what financing is?
They can. We have a lot of our, in my industry, we do have chattel lending, which is home only. And a lot of times when people decide that they want to lease their home, like in a community or park, they still pay that lease rent, but it's just on the home only. We have a lot of national lenders that offer that. Not many of our traditional banks offer that, but then on our land home, they do. And then on my modular, most of my retailers do a construction loan with a local bank to do those modular.
And I believe a few years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we may have passed a bill that helped mobile homes be classified as real property for tax purposes. Did that also tie into lending?
So if you own the land, it can be classified as real property, but if you do not own the land, it will be classified as personal property. The House, I think either the Senate or House passed it, but I don't think the bill that you're referring to actually made it to the governor's office. But it has it's been brought forth many times, and especially for veterans. But if you own the land, can it be qualified as real property? You have to own the home and the land together.
So otherwise, mobile homes would be classified as personal property, similar to an automobile.
That is correct.
What about modular homes or the cross?
Modulars are usually considered real property because I don't know all modular homes have land to go with them. A lot of them are put on slabs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, we may have questions.
Yeah, so let me go back to what you were talking about at the very beginning, where you were talking about people that were purchasing these factory-built sheds.
Yes.
Okay, one of the other issues that have come to my attention and that I feel like the legislature needs to speak to is a language that we put in a couple of years ago when we were doing I think it was the statewide building code bill that I think it's in 2016. We did a carve out for agricultural buildings. And what I've heard these companies, these portable building companies, use the sales pitch of this is an agricultural building. Therefore, it's exempt from building codes or inspection purposes. And people are putting them up as a agricultural building. And then over a short period of time, they end up getting closed in or they get other things happen to them. Next thing you know, a permit that was pulled for a electrical meter that was to provide heat for farm animals or whatever is converted over into a residential structure. And that's happened quite a bit down in South Mississippi, but I know in some other areas that's come to my attention as well as something that we may want to look at as.
Well, I know I was just looking at the bill yesterday and I'll go back and read it. But the other thing it put in there was fishing camp and hunting camps.
That's right.
And so that's another thing. People are going and saying, oh, I'm just going to use this as a fishing camp. Well, with the state fire marshal's office, if an inspector comes back by there and there's someone living underneath there, they can actually arrest them for fraud because it says that you can, if you're permanently living in that, but that's another loophole. But you know better than I about fishing and hunting at the Mississippi legislature. So
It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
I'm
But
not
then lastly, Mr. Chairman, on another thing that she was talking about, your neighborhood that you showed the builder package. So I've gone to other states and I've looked at neighborhoods that are very similar to this, and it was usually done for rental properties for senior living.
Mhm.
So great communities, but
It
the
is.
reason why they seem to be one or single owner units instead of like condos
Right.
or small neighborhoods for tiny houses is that, and I'm going to say this for the state of Mississippi, we don't have a strong homeowners association laws that help protect our owners of properties or deal with how do you go in and enforce some type of a violation? So our knee-jerk reaction is to get the cities to jump in and try to do something. I don't really think that's the practice. Other states have done better jobs at giving homeowners association opportunities to correct some violations of homeowners associations rather than going and filing suit on it. And I think that's something that we should look at, because one thing that we want to be able to do is when we build affordable housing, we don't want it to fall into disrepair or to go
Totally
down
agree.
in value. We want it to go up in value.
Totally. agree.
Pride of ownership is one of those things. And again, we go back to what do you need to teach people to be successful
Totally agree.
homeowners? That's part of it, is that you've got to keep your house up so that your neighbors will keep theirs up and you have an increase in value. And I think that's something that we can do.
I think the
I
increase
think
in
that's
value.
important. And I know when I served on the PRV board, there were neighborhoods out in Rankin County that were first, when they were first built, they had no homeowners association. So then we had to enforce, the PRV had to adopt that. Whereas in the beginning, if that homeowners association had adopted those, rules and regs, it would have been a whole lot better and property values would have been maintained.
I would just like to see our vice chair put together something, a brief on this for us to look at what their legal avenues would be for us to help homeowners associations.
Thank you. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do think that we all want our property values to go up, but then that's the problem of affordable housing, right? Before we wrap up, I promised that I'd let you follow up on a statement you want to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. I just wanted to follow up on a question you had earlier about what was being done for the biased appraisals. I serve on the Fair Housing Committee for the National Association of Realtors. And one of the things that they have addressed is starting January 1, 2026, this includes 8 hours of courses, part of qualified education, and 7 hours course for the continuing education cycle. And the purpose of this training aims to reduce the bias in appraisal process by educating appraisers on discriminatory behavior and fair housing laws. So there is it is being addressed. They know the issue is there on a national level with the appraisers and with the realtors. So it's something that they're taking very seriously.
Okay, can you provide some information for me so I can share that as well? And possibly a contact.
I can actually send it directly to you, or you can look under the Appraisal Foundation. And that goes over all the details of what they're going through to combat this issue. And it's the new laws for starting in January 1 of 2026.
Okay, please share your contact before you leave.
I will. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thank you, committee. And thank you to all the presenters today. We greatly appreciate your input. I think that we got a lot of valuable information and have several things to discuss and consider. So thank you all very much.